Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a world where winter isn't just a season, it's a test of survival. You're about to find out exactly how the Vikings, those wild wool-wrapped legends of the North, got through the kinds of nights that would make your modern space heater beg for mercy. We're talking bone-splitting cold, snow that doesn't melt for months, and a wind so sharp it could cut your thoughts in half. Honestly, you probably won't survive this, but that's okay. That's what the blanket is for Dot, so before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me in the comments, what city are you watching from, and what time is it there right now? I'm genuinely curious to know what part of the world you're huddled up in now. Dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake up in the middle of a frozen Scandinavian winter, somewhere around the year 1875. Snow's piled up outside like nature's own fortress wall. It's not just cold, it's asterisk, why are my eyelashes frozen together? Cold, the kind of cold that gets into your teeth. You're in Viking territory now, and that means long nights, barely any sun, and a daily battle not to die of exposure down outside your longhouse. The world is white and still. Ice clings to the edges of everything, and snowdrifts rise higher than your waist. The fjords are glazed over. Trees groan under the weight of frozen branches. You can hear howls distantly, like the wind itself is hungry, and it kind of is. But inside there's life. Thick smoke curls toward the rafters, seeping through tiny slits in the ceiling. The smell is wood smoke and boiling meat, and warm bodies packed together under layers of fur and wool. You're in a shared bed platform, feet tucked beneath your neighbor's armpit, not optional. And there are at least a dozen of you under one massive wool blanket. You try not to breathe too deeply. Let's just say the concept of deodorant hasn't been invented yet. And still, it's warm, warmer than you'd think. And that's not an accident. The Viking people had a knack for reading the land, for building lives where it seemed no one should. You're in a longhouse now, one of the main structures of a Viking farmstead. These houses aren't pretty, but they're genius. Long and narrow, with thick turf walls and slanted timber roofs, they're like hobbit holes stretched into rectangles. The outer walls are packed with a mix of mud, manure, straw, and magic or insulation. Depending on how you want to phrase it. What keeps the cold out is a combo of things. First, the animals. Cows, pigs, goats, they don't just feed you, they sleep with you, or at least next door. Their body heat rises, seeps through the thin inner walls, and shares a little warmth with the humans. It's a deeply uncomfortable kind of mutual benefit. If you've ever tried to fall asleep to the sound of a cow breathing heavily, congratulations. You'd make a decent Viking. And at the heart of it all, literally at the center of the longhouse, is the hearth. The single fire. That burns low and steady all night, all season. This isn't your flickering little candle moment. It's your lifeline. The fire is small by necessity, smoke management is a thing, and chimneys don't exist yet, but it's constant. If it goes out, someone could freeze to death in their sleep. If it smokes too much, you'll be coughing sick by morning. One historical fact that surprises most people. These homes were often designed with no real windows, just one small smoke hole in the roof, and maybe a door that lets in more wind than light. It's less about views, more about not dying. Now here's a quirky twist. You're surrounded by carved wooden posts, some of which aren't just decorative. They might be your ancestors literally. Vikings believed that spirits lived on through certain sacred objects, And sometimes they built their homes around posts that contained relics or even bits of bone. So when you lean back against that wooden pillar for warmth, there's a non-zero chance it's part of Uncle Bjorn. Cozy, right? But there's a real debate among scholars about just how common these warm, family-centered houses were. Some believe that Viking society was more stratified than we often think, meaning not everyone had the luxury of a warm longhouse and well-fed animals. If you were lower class or unlucky, your winter home might be more like a glorified shed. Sparse insulation, fewer people to huddle with, less meat, more snow blowing in through the cracks. If the elite had fire, some folks probably just had frostbite. Still, the clever use of community heat, tightly packed spaces, and raw resourcefulness allowed these people to persist. They didn't just survive winters, they lived in them. Had birthdays, told jokes, made babies. Which, no surprise, tends to happen more frequently when you've got nothing to do. For 16 hours of darkness, except lie in bed next to your entire extended family. Romantic, huh? But you're not there yet. You're still cold. Your breath fogs in front of you like a ghost that refuses to leave. Somewhere a child cries softly in their sleep, probably dreaming of a summer that won't come for 4 more months. The fire crackles. You try to shift positions, but your legs are tangled with someone's grandmother. Too bad. You shut your eyes, tuck your nose into a scratchy bit of wool, and wait for morning, or at least for the darkness to get slightly less black. Welcome to Viking winter. Morning, if you can call it that, arrives without sunlight. There's just a faint grayness that creeps in through the gaps around the longhouse door, as if the sky is still deciding whether it wants to bother with the day. You're awake because someone got up to pee and stepped directly on your face. It's fine. You're a Viking now. You roll over, extract your foot from the tangled limbs of at least 2 strangers, and pull on the first available piece of clothing, which smells like goat, or possibly is goat, hard to say. Your boots are stiff with frost, your breath still. Clouds in front of you, but you're alive, and that's something. Not everyone makes it through the night, especially when the temperature dips low enough to freeze boiling water in midair. Which, yes, you'll get to try later if you're feeling brave. But right now, your survival depends on 2 things: keeping your heat in and keeping the cold out. That's where Viking architecture steps in to work its slow-burning magic. The longhouse is more than just a shelter. It's a living system. You notice it when you sit up, how low the ceiling feels, how the air is warmer just a few feet off the ground, and how everything is organized around that long central hearth. It's not just for cooking. It's the sun you build your day around. Even now, an old woman is crouched over it, stirring a pot of thin porridge that smells like barley and desperation. There's no sugar, no cinnamon. This is the kind of breakfast you eat, because it keeps your heart beating as you move around. Careful not to bump your head on the beams blackened with decades of smoke. You start to notice the layers. The longhouse walls aren't just wood. They're packed thick with turf and moss. Viking builders knew that insulation didn't have to look pretty, it just had to work. That moss you see poking out between the planks? It's not decoration, it's stuffing. Think of it as prehistoric caulk. It expands when wet, blocks drafts, and probably houses several very confused insects trying to survive the winter with you. And then there's the roof, angled low and heavy, sometimes with a thick layer of sod on top, weighed down with snow. You'd think snow would be a problem, but here's the twist. The snow helps. It acts like an extra blanket, trapping heat underneath and keeping things just a little warmer inside. It's the same principle as an igloo, but way smellier. One historical fact that often goes overlooked is how deliberate Viking home design really was. These weren't randomly built huts. The positioning of the longhouse, often aligned east to west, maximized the little bit of sunlight they got. The doors were small to minimize heat loss, and there were even interior divisions to keep the warmest parts reserved for humans, with animals kept in colder but still protected areas. And let's not skip over the ceiling height. You're starting to feel it now, how you can't quite stand up straight without ducking under a beam. That's by design. Heat rises, and in these low-ceilinged rooms, it doesn't have far to go. So instead of floating uselessly up into a vast, chilly space, like in a cathedral or modern open-floor home, the heat stays close. Close enough that you can feel it on your cheeks if you sit up near the fire. Close enough that your frost-numbed fingers might start tingling back to life if you wave them gently over the embers. But then, there's the downside. Smoke. You cough involuntarily as the wind outside shifts and the smoke from the hearth backs up into the room. There's no chimney, just a hole in the roof that sometimes works and sometimes doesn't. Viking life was a constant negotiation with the elements, and this was one of those compromises. You either freeze or you wheeze, sometimes both. And here's where things get weird. Some scholars argue that these smoky conditions may have helped preserve meat and even sanitize the space in a weird, unintended way, like a low-tech air purifier powered by lung damage. Others debate whether the respiratory problems were worth it. Archaeologists have found remains with evidence of chronic sinus infections and lung issues, especially in the elderly. So while the architecture kept you warm, it didn't exactly guarantee you'd live to complain about the ventilation. Still, it beats freezing to death. And if you're part of a wealthier household, you've got more than just smoke and packed moss going for you. You've got wooden planks on the floor instead of just dirt, animal hides covering the walls. Some longhouses even had stone or brick fire pits to better contain and radiate heat. That's high-end Viking living. You, though, you're working class. Dirt floor, drafty walls, mystery smells. But don't underestimate the power of body heat. Last night wasn't a fluke. Vikings didn't just sleep together for comfort. They did it because human bodies packed tight create a kind of shared heat bubble. It's awkward, sure, and personal space isn't a thing, but when it's a matter of freezing, alone or spooning with 3 generations of your neighbor's family, you make peace with it fast. You move closer to the hearth now, rubbing your hands together, eyes watering from the smoke. An old man to your left is sharpening a knife. A child on your right is poking the fire with a stick she's not supposed to have. You notice a row of boots lined up near the door, stuffed with straw and herbs to keep them from stiffening completely. These people have learned how to live with winter, not just to endure it, but to navigate it, inch by frozen inch. Quirky fact, some longhouses had built-in benches along the walls that doubled as beds, storage, and seating you're sitting on. One now, your backside slowly warming from a cushion that smells vaguely of sheep. Beneath you, there's likely some dried fish, a tangle of spare rope, and probably someone's winter socks, the Viking version of under-bed storage. You glance toward the door. It's still shut tight, a heavy wood slab bolted from the inside. Going outside means battling the wind, the snow, and the ever-present risk of slipping on ice and breaking something important. It also means letting in a blast of air so cold, it feels like a punishment from Odin himself. So for now, you stay where you are. Outside, the cold rages on. Inside, the heat holds, barely. You shift closer to the fire, wrap a woolen cloak tighter around your shoulders, and listen to the sounds of your temporary home. Someone's humming, the pot bubbles gently, snow hisses where it melts along the roofline. You're not exactly comfortable, but you're surviving, and in Viking country, that counts as a win. You're starting to realize something important. If you want to make it through this winter as a Viking, you can't just sit by the fire all day like a baked potato in a wool wrap. You've got to move, work, hunt, fix things, and look convincingly alive, even when every muscle in your body begs to crawl back under that communal fur heap. And if you're going to do that without your fingers turning black and falling off, you're going to need the right clothes, which means layers. Lots of them. Viking winter fashion isn't about looking good, it's about not dying. First comes your under tunic, a long, itchy shirt made of coarse linen or wool. Scratchy, slightly damp, and weirdly comforting, it's your second skin. Over that goes your wool over tunic, thick and roughly stitched by hand. There's no fast fashion. Here, only slow, stubborn survival. Your legs get woolen trousers, possibly lined with fur if you're lucky or well connected. And your feet are shoved into leather boots stuffed with hay, moss, or even bits of rabbit fur. Basically, anything that keeps the frost from biting straight through to your bones. You wrap a belt around your waist, not for style, but to carry your knife, your pouch of salt, and possibly a bone comb. Yes, a comb. Viking grooming wasn't completely non-existent. They might have smelled like wet goats, but they still hated tangled hair. Then there's your cloak. This is the MVP of Viking outerwear. Made of thick wool and fastened with a brooch, it drapes over your shoulders like a warm, socially acceptable blanket. If you're rich, maybe it's dyed with madder root or covered in embroidery. If you're not, it's a sturdy brown mass that smells like the sheep it came from. Either way, it holds in precious heat. You might also get mittens, thumbless and made of felted wool, or even fur-lined gloves if someone in your household is crafty. And yes, they sometimes wore hats. Not the horned kind, please let that myth go, but rounded. Wool caps or fur-lined hoods that hugged the ears like survival helmets. Here's the quirky part. They didn't wash these clothes very often. Not because they didn't care about cleanliness. Though let's be honest, hygiene was relative, but because water freezes. An icy laundry day is not a vibe. So instead of washing, they'd air their clothes out, smoke them by the hearth, and sometimes even rub them with snow to clean them. If you're thinking that sounds like rolling around in frozen filth, you're not entirely wrong. In fact, one preserved Viking garment discovered in a bog showed heavy staining around the armpits and color-clear evidence that yes, these outfits were worn hard and cleaned rarely. But when you're living in a world where snowdrifts are taller than your child and the sun shows up for about 6 hours a day, smelling like a fermented sheep blanket isn't your biggest problem. Still, there's a scholarly debate that keeps things interesting. Some researchers argue that Viking clothing was much more colorful and decorative than we give it credit for. Dyes made from berries, roots, and lichens could create reds, yellows, greens, and even purples. So yes, while you might expect every Viking to look like a background character from a grim Nordic noir series, some may have actually rocked bright tunics and striped leg wrappings like medieval peacocks. Others push back, pointing out how rare and labor-intensive dyes were, especially in winter, suggesting that most people probably dressed like earth-toned potatoes. Right now, you're wearing whatever you could scavenge from the shared family pile. and you're grateful for every inch of warmth. The cloak smells like someone else's sweat. The mittens are two different sizes. One boot has a hole in it, plugged with dried moss. You don't care. You're mobile, layered, and slightly more prepared for what lies beyond the longhouse door. Stepping outside is like being punched in the soul by ice. The wind slices sideways, driving tiny shards of snow into your exposed cheeks. You turn your face down, letting your hood catch the worst of it. The ground crunches beneath your boots' frozen dirt, packed snow, and bits of brittle hay that escape from the stable. You trudge past the animals, cows huffing out plumes of breath like angry steam engines, goats bleating as they huddle together for warmth. If you're lucky, your household has a spare building, a small outbuilding where tools are stored, food is dried, and sometimes garments are sewn. Inside, a woman sits by a tiny fire, spinning wool with frozen fingers. Her spindle turns with rhythmic patience. The thread that comes from it will be knit into socks, tunics, cloaks, anything to wrap the body in another layer of warmth. Spinning wool isn't glamorous, but without her, you'd be dead by next week. You nod your thanks. She barely looks up. There's too much to do. Back inside the longhouse, you peel off your outer cloak and shake off the snow, watching steam rise from your shoulders like you've just escaped the underworld. Your boots go by the fire to thaw. Someone tosses you a chunk of dry bread to gnaw on, which is as close to a snack as you'll get before supper. You wrap yourself in a blanket, sit down on the bench again, and breathe deeply, grateful again to be warmer than the outside. Here's a little historical nugget. Wool was life. The Vikings prized sheep for more than just food. Wool was versatile, durable, and warm even when wet. Viking women were masters of textile work, spinning and weaving, year-round, often making enough surplus to trade. Textiles were a form of currency. Cloaks, tunics, and mittens could be bartered like coins. In winter, having extra clothing wasn't just nice, it was wealth. It was survival. You catch your reflection in a dark bit of metal hair, matted cheeks, windburned, nose running from the cold. Congratulations, you look exactly like you're supposed to. You're dressed to survive a world that doesn't care whether you make it through the night. And now you understand something deep. Warmth isn't just about fire. It's about fabric, friction, and 47 layers of scratchy wool that make you look like a very stressed bear. The cold presses against the walls again, like it's waiting for you to make a mistake. You won't. You're layered, bundled, and slightly damp, but not dead. Which, in this part of the world, is about as good as it gets. By now, your face has thawed just enough to feel the itch where your hood rubbed against your skin, and your stomach is beginning to signal that it's not thrilled about this whole barley porridge and air diet you've been on. You glance toward the hearth, where someone is scraping the bottom of a pot with a carved wooden spoon, like they're trying to summon flavor from the ash. You're not alone. Everyone is hungry, and in Viking winter, feeding yourself becomes a full-time job, and not an easy one. Food in these months isn't about enjoyment. It's about fuel. The kind of fuel that stokes the fire inside your body, keeps your core warm, and gives you just enough energy to slog through a snow-covered world. That means fat, lots of it. You've probably never been so grateful to see congealed bacon grease in your life. In Viking winter, calories are gold, and the foods that stick to your ribs, meat, lard, butter, cheese are the ones that keep you vertical when the cold wants to turn you into a Norse popsicle. Today's meal, you're lucky. A thick stew made from salted mutton, dried beans, and root vegetables that were buried deep in the earth before the ground froze solid. A bit of onion maybe, if it hasn't molded. Definitely some turnip. And fat glorious. Greasy, life-saving animal fat floating on top in shimmering blobs that coat your throat like a scarf from the inside. You dip a hunk of flatbread into the stew and pretend not to notice the faint taste of smoke and dirt. You chew slowly. Every bite matters. Meat doesn't come easy. Hunting in winter is risky business. Most game has either migrated, gone into hiding, or turned lean and desperate, just like the people chasing them. That's why the meat you're eating now was likely preserved weeks or even months ago. Salted, dried, smoked, or fermented, whatever it took to keep it edible. There's a hanging rack in the corner of the longhouse where strips of dried fish dangle like prehistoric jerky. They smell like regret, but taste like survival. And then there's the fermented stuff. Vikings didn't have refrigerators, so they got creative. That meant burying fish under the ground in pits, letting them rot just enough to become edible-ish. Hakarl, anyone? It's the culinary equivalent of a dare. And yes, it's real. Some scholars believe such fermentation methods weren't just desperation meals. They were delicacies. A twisted badge of honor. You eat it, you live, you brag. Others debate whether the average Viking actually stomached the stuff regularly, or if it was more like a last-ditch option when the salted meat ran out. And of course, no Viking meal is complete without a good swig of mead, or at least ale. Water in winter could be dangerous. Rivers freeze, wells get sludgy, and snow ... Well, snow is cold, but who knows what was buried in that drift last week. So they drank fermented beverages, low-alcohol ale made from barley, sometimes flavored with herbs or berries. Mead, if they were feeling fancy, made from fermented honey. Not strong enough to get blackout drunk, but just enough to forget that you can't feel your toes. One historical fact that might surprise you: Viking diets were surprisingly balanced for the time. Archaeological digs show traces of grains, nuts, legumes, and vegetables. They knew how to grow things, store things, dry things. Sure, winter made all that harder, but they planned ahead. They had root cellars cool, dark holes dug into the earth where potatoes, onions, and other root vegetables could be stored for months. Some even had small granaries to protect grain from moisture and rodents. You get up from your seat, licking stew from your fingers, and step outside again. This time to fetch more firewood. Your cloak flaps in the wind like a disappointed ghost. The woodpile is half buried in snow, and your fingers scream as you pick up a frozen log. But the fire inside the longhouse won't feed itself. You drag back a few pieces, drop them by the hearth, and reward yourself with another chunk of bread. Chewy, a little burnt, and hard enough to qualify as a self-defense weapon. Quirky fact for you: some Vikings added crushed bones or tree bark to their bread when flour was scarce. Technically edible, mostly regrettable. But it kept their stomachs from growling too loudly when the real food ran low, and the food will run low. That's the most terrifying truth about Viking winter. No matter how carefully you store, dry, preserve, or ferment, you're racing the clock. Each meal chips away at the stockpile. Each blizzard delays a hunting trip. Each broken tool or dead animal tips the balance a little closer to disaster. That's why meals are eaten slowly, with reverence. Not because they're sacred, though sometimes they are, but because each bite counts toward your survival tally. There's a kind of intimacy to it, too. Eating by firelight, passing bowls back and forth, sharing scraps, sucking marrow from bones, while someone hums an old song you barely remember. There's no concept of personal plates. One big pot, many spoons. One loaf of bread, many hands. And always someone watching, quietly counting how many rations are left, how many mouths must be fed tomorrow. Even now, back near the hearth, you can hear two elders whispering over a tally stick. It's not just gossip. They're doing math, simple, brutal math. How many days left before the root cellar is empty? How many jars of preserved butter? How many people can get sick before things fall apart? You take one last sip of ale, let it sit warm in your belly, and lean back. Full for now, fed for tonight, but always aware that winter's just getting started. Outside, the snow falls silently, blanketing the world in a kind of deadly peace. Inside, bellies are full, the fire is steady, and the cold is still knocking politely at the door. So you wrap yourself tighter, sink a little deeper into your furs, and prepare for tomorrow's battle with the cold. Because no matter how clever the cooking, how preserved the meat, or how hearty the stew, winter's still winning, and it always wants more. The fire has been burning low for a while now, but no one dares let it go out. Even if the heat has only made it a few degrees above freezing in here, that little orange glow is everything. It flickers against the smoke-stained rafters, casting shadows that shift like ancient spirits dancing in slow motion. You sit close, elbows on your knees, feeling the ache that comes not from working too hard, but from simply staying alive. This right here is the Viking hearth. Not just a fire pit, it's the heart, the pulse, the sacred core. And sacred is the right word. You're starting to realize that in a place where winter can break a person in half, fire isn't just warmth. It's ritual, it's myth, it's how the world continues. The hearth isn't something to take lightly. It's watched, respected, even spoken to in some households. You've seen the way the old woman stirs the stew clockwise, mumbling to herself. You thought she was a little bit losing it. She's not. She's preserving a tradition, one where fire listens. In Norse mythology, fire isn't just an element. It's a force with its own will. There's Logi, the fire giant, who once battled Loki in a contest of consumption and won by not only eating the meat, but the bones and the plate too. That's not just a story. It's a metaphor for fire's hunger. It devours everything if you let it. So you respect it, you manage it, and you never ever let it die when the snow's still falling. Each morning the hearth must be revived carefully, using embers banked in ash overnight. You saw it earlier, how the firekeeper used a long iron poker to push back the white dust and find the soft orange glow beneath. Then came the tinder dry moss, dry bark, maybe a whisper of straw, and then breath. That slow, reverent blowing, like waking a god from sleep. There's a strange intimacy to it. You think about all the people who've sat right where you're sitting, hands outstretched, watching their own fingers come back from the brink of frostbite. The fire gives you back your extremities. You owe it. Even the design of the longhouse makes you realize just how central this fire is. Everything radiates from it. Sleeping areas, benches, food storage. It's the gravitational pull that organizes the room. People shift around it all day long, cooking, sewing, carving, repairing. And at night, the fire becomes a nightlight, a guardian. It keeps the shadows at bay, not just the physical ones, but the darker things your ancestors whispered about when they thought the cold was listening. Here's a fun little fringe fact. Some Viking families believed in hearth spirits like Tiny. invisible house guardians that lived in the fire and watched over the home. If the fire went out unexpectedly or burned too low, it was seen as a bad omen, maybe even a warning that someone in the family would fall ill or die. So it wasn't just about staying warm. It was about staying safe. If something weird happened in the fire's glow, people paid attention. Now, there's a bit of a scholarly dispute about how symbolic the hearth actually was in everyday Viking life. Some historians argue it was just a practical thing. Fire equals warmth. End of story. Others lean into the poetic, suggesting the hearth represented continuity between generations. The line between chaos and order, even between this world and the next. The truth? Probably somewhere in between. Because when it's -20 outside and the wind sounds like it's trying to chew through your door, even the most practical person starts whispering to the flames. And let's not forget the logistics. Fire doesn't just show up. Someone has to gather the fuel. Every day, someone, usually the younger, healthier members of the household, goes out into the snow to collect wood, chop logs, and sometimes even dig out the coal pit if the weather allows. If the snow is too deep, they dig down to the firewood pile, which has been buried to protect it from moisture. You remember how your fingers felt earlier. That was just the warmer part. Try splitting frozen birch with a hand axe in a blizzard, and then come talk to us about cold. You shift closer, boots off, toes dangerously close to the ember bed. Everyone's careful not to block the airflow. You've learned that fire, like people, needs space to breathe. Too much crowding, and the smoke backs up into the house, choking everyone. Too little attention, and it dies. It's a living balance. And tonight, as another snowstorm begins to roll in outside, you're feeling just how fragile that balance is. One of the older men stands now. He picks up a wooden bowl filled with pine resin and throws a pinch into the fire. A sharp, sweet scent cuts through the usual stew meat smoke perfume of the room. Everyone goes quiet. You don't ask why. No one ever explains these things to outsiders. But you feel it. A moment of recognition, of reverence. Maybe it's an offering. Maybe it's just the smell of cleaner air for a second. But it matters. Sometimes the fire's the only light in a world that feels like it's been swallowed by frost. And for a few long months, it's the closest thing to the sun you'll see. Which is why, in some Viking homes, fire rituals were tied to the cycle of the sun itself. They celebrated solstices with bonfires massive roaring beasts of flame meant to summon back the light. Fire festivals, torchlit processions, flames dancing through the night like a rebellion. Against the dark, you rest your chin on your knees and watch the sparks drift upward. They hit the smoke-blackened rafters and disappear like stars burning. Out in miniature. Behind you, someone starts humming a song that probably predates every building in this village. You don't recognize the tune, but you feel it in your chest. Warmth, life. The fire's still burning, you're still here. Not bad for a day's work. Night again. As if the day had only bothered to peek its head above the horizon and then immediately decided, nope, thanks, and vanished. Outside, the dark presses against the walls like a living thing, and the cold has that sharp, dry quality that makes your nostrils stick together when you breathe. You're tucked back inside, sharing body heat with every relative, goat, and stranger who happens to be stuck in the longhouse with you. And suddenly, the idea of a hot bath, something you used to take for granted, feels like the height of unattainable luxury. But bathing? That's hilarious. No one is bathing. Not in this season. In winter, washing yourself becomes an extreme sport. The rivers and lakes are frozen over, and even the wells can be more ice than water. You can't exactly boil a bucket and pour it over your head without wasting valuable firewood. So Vikings adapted. Bathing went from a regular hygiene routine to something closer to an occasional miracle. Now here's the kicker. The Vikings were actually cleaner than a lot of their European contemporaries in warmer months. They were known to wash on Saturdays, what they called laugardugger, or bath day, fun fact, and a core part of their week. And they used combs, tweezers, and even little ear spoons. Personal grooming was a thing. But once winter set in, that all went out the very frosty window. Welcome to the season of strategic filth. You wake up already sweating in your wool layers, which somehow makes you colder when you get up. Your hair is matted to one side of your face, and your socks are suspiciously damp despite not moving for 6 hours. There's a basin of water near the hearth, half frozen, and you splash a little on your face, just enough to sting and wake you up. That's your bath. Enjoy. As for the rest of your body, you cover the smells with other smells. Burnt herbs, animal fat, smoke. Honestly, most people around you reek so similarly that your own stench just blends into the symphony. The human nose can only complain so much before it gives up and resets. And underwear? Technically yes, though not in the Victoria's Secret sense. Viking underclothes were linen if you were lucky, wool if you were practical, and often reused, patched, and let's be honest, crusty. It wasn't uncommon to go weeks without changing them in winter. Not out of laziness, but because taking off clothes was a hazard. Every second you spend naked in winter is a gamble your internal organs might lose. One slightly horrifying historical fact: parasites were common. Lice, fleas, ticks, and worse were part of daily life. There are even lice combs buried with Viking bodies. These people fought off enemies with axes and also spent a chunk of their free time chasing tiny bugs through their hair. It's humbling. And while winter didn't exactly kill the lice, oh no, it did slow them down a bit. Even bugs don't like the cold. Which brings you to a weird little Viking hygiene hack: saunas. Yes, seriously. These weren't the steamy hotel spas you're thinking of, but stone or wood huts built near water sources, heated by fire, and sometimes shared communally. In these hot rooms, people would sweat out the dirt, scrape themselves clean with metal or bone, and maybe splash cold water over their bodies if they felt brave. The steam helped open pores, and the heat, for just a moment, let them forget the world was frozen solid outside. There's debate among scholars over just how widespread these saunas were. Some believe they were mainly for the wealthy or high-status members of Viking society. Others think they were relatively common in certain regions, especially where geothermal activity made heating easier, like in Iceland. You're not in Iceland, so you've probably never seen one. You're stuck with face splashing and strategically placed smoke. Still, hygiene mattered in its own way, not for the sake of freshness, but for health. Wounds had to be cleaned with snow or boiled water. Dirty hands could mean infected cuts. So, even if you're not washing daily, you're doing your best to keep things from rotting off, which is more effort than it sounds in a world where your toenails might freeze if you take your boots off for too long. You spot someone pulling a louse from their child's hair and crushing it between two fingernails with the kind of grim efficiency that only comes from years of practice. It's gross, sure, but it's life. People weren't squeamish. They were practical. Cold and practical. You sit back down near the hearth, still wrapped in your cloak, and glance at the basin again. There's a frozen layer on top now. You break through it with a stick and let your hand hover just above. That's how cold the water is. You can feel it before you touch it. And yet, someone will use it again tomorrow, probably to wipe their armpits or soak a cracked heel. Quirky fact: Vikings sometimes chewed on twigs of birch or juniper to freshen their breath. These natural toothbrushes had antibacterial properties and didn't freeze solid like actual brushes might. So while your body might be 7 layers of wool and despair, at least your teeth aren't trying to escape your face. And now, a word on your hair. It's long, tangled, and smells like campfire, which is fine. Everyone's hair smells like campfire. You might plait it if you can find a comb that isn't being used to delouse someone else. Beards? Oh yes. Full, bushy, sometimes decorated with beads or braided for style and utility. A frozen beard in the wind was a badge of honor. A solid icicle hanging from your chin meant you were alive, outside, and hardcore. You lie back against the bench, letting the smell of smoke and dried fish fill your nostrils. The air feels thicker. Here, humid with sweat, ash, and survival. You scratch your ankle through 3 layers of sock and fur, wondering if that's a mosquito bite from last summer or something much, much worse. Bathing, as it turns out, isn't something you miss until it's gone. You never realized how nice it was to feel clean until clean became a seasonal concept. But you're adapting. You stink, everyone stinks, and it's weirdly freeing. The cold covers a multitude of sins, and anyway, it's not like you'll be attending a fancy dinner party anytime soon. Unless, of course, you count that unsettling smell coming from the stew pot as a dinner guest. In which case, you might want to freshen up with a handful of snow and some birch bark. You're ready for another long night, and no, you don't feel clean. But you feel alive and in this world. That's good enough. By now you've learned to breathe through your nose only when absolutely necessary, and to never question what's squishing inside your boot. You've also learned that while the longhouse offers a cramped, smoky safety, life doesn't pause just because the air outside hurts your skin. The Vikings weren't hibernating through the cold. They were moving, traveling, working, fighting, even raiding, because apparently frostbite builds character. You step outside again, the door groaning behind you, and the cold hits like a slap made of knives. It's not just the temperature. It's the way the wind curls into your clothes, creeps beneath your tunic, and makes your bones want to shiver right out of your body. You hunch your shoulders, adjust your hood, and trudge toward the stable, where a trail has been dug into the waist-high snow. You've been volunteered for travel duty today. Lucky you. Vikings had to move, even in the bleakest weather. Food had to be fetched or hunted. Neighbors needed visiting, messages carried. In some cases, entire trading journeys or military expeditions happened in the dead of winter. That means traveling across icy rivers, frozen lakes, and snow-blanketed forests, where your only companions are creaking trees and your own regret. You bundle up as best you can, woolen layers, a fur-lined hood, thick gloves, and boots wrapped in animal hide. You're wearing enough to feel like a waddling bear, but you're still cold. The trick is not stopping. Keep walking. Let the motion warm you from the inside. Eventually, your body will forget it's dying, probably. The Vikings were smart about winter travel. Instead of trudging through the snow on foot like a clueless future person, they used sleds, not the fun, down the hill kind, but big, flat-bottomed sledges pulled by horses or oxen. If you were lucky, someone in your party had skis. Yes, skis. Long, curved wooden boards strapped to leather boots, sometimes with animal sinew bindings. These weren't for sport. These were survival gear. They helped people glide over snow with more speed and less misery. In fact, one of the earliest historical references to skiing comes from Norse sources. There's even a god for it, Ullr, the bow-carrying deity of skiing and winter hunting. Because when your landscape looks like the inside of a freezer for 6 months, you start assigning divine status to anyone who can move quickly through it. You, however, are not divine. You're sliding along on foot, one step at a time, following a narrow path packed down by previous travelers. Your boots crunch loudly. Every sound is magnified out here. No bird song, no running water, just the soft roar of the wind in the pines and the occasional distant crack of a tree snapping under the weight of ice. You try not to flinch. The cold hits hardest when you stop to catch your breath, so you don't. You keep walking, teeth clenched, eyes squinting against the blinding white. Snow reflects the weak sunlight like a mirror, and it stings your eyes. Some Vikings made primitive goggles out of bone or wood, with slits carved into them to reduce the glare. You squint instead. Function over fashion. Quirky fact time. Viking warriors on skis were real. There's even evidence of ski troops used in conflict. If that sounds wild to you, imagine someone gliding toward you silently through the snow, armed with a spear and a deeply unimpressed expression. Ski warfare wasn't just fast. It was quiet and terrifying, especially if you were the one on foot, back. To you, you've reached the edge of the woods, where a stand of pine trees offers some shelter from the wind. You pause here, snow up to your thighs, and try to warm your hands by rubbing them inside your gloves. Your breath huffs out in big clouds. You shift your weight and hear the groan of frozen branches above you. Somewhere nearby, something moves: a fox, a squirrel, something hungrier. You don't want to know. And here's a historical debate worth pondering while your eyebrows freeze. How often did Vikings actually travel far during winter? Some scholars argue they hunkered down and kept to their own lands as much as possible. Others point to trading records, sagas, and burial finds that suggest travel, even international trade, happened year-round. There are accounts of ships pulled across ice, sleds carrying goods across borders, and raiding parties that didn't wait for spring. Vikings were hardy, impatient, and often desperate. Waiting wasn't always an option. Back in the present, well, your borrowed Viking present, you finally delivered your parcel. A clay pot sealed with wax, probably filled with a dried herb or rendered fat. You don't ask, you don't care. All you want is to turn around and start the long trudge home. But first, a cup of warm ale from your host and a moment to sit by their fire. It's amazing how generous people can be when you show up shivering, red-faced, and partially covered in frost. Your return journey is faster, not because it's easier, but because your limbs are going numb and you've achieved that magical state known as rage momentum. You stomp through the snow like it owes you money, ignoring the way your gloves have stiffened and your toes feel suspiciously detached. The wind hasn't let up. In fact, it's worse. It's howling now, a real Viking lullaby. You finally stumble back into the longhouse, cheeks blazing from the cold, steam rising off your shoulders like you're about to ascend to Valhalla. Someone helps pull your boots off. Another throws a fur over your shoulders. You're too cold to speak, so you just grunt your thanks and shuffle toward the hearth like a drunk bear. The warmth feels like punishment at first, stinging your ears, prickling your skin, but then it melts into something resembling comfort. You made it. One journey, two near-death experiences, and several ice-related regrets. But you're back, you're thawing, you're alive. And the snow is still falling. The wind outside roars like a jealous god, but in here, the longhouse has turned into a dim, flickering cavern of voices and firelight. You're curled up close to the hearth again, draped in a fur that smells like wet animal and old smoke. And the best thing about this moment, nobody's asking you to go anywhere. Tonight, you stay put. And while the cold still seeps in through the turf walls and the wooden beams creak like they're remembering better seasons, something else is happening. People are settling in. The room grows quieter, slower, denser with anticipation. It's story time. You've seen it coming for a while. The signs are familiar now. The low lighting, the way everyone shifts a little closer to the fire, and the one old man who clears his throat in the exact same way every time, like he's about to deliver a royal decree. You're about to witness something vital to Viking survival, not just physically, but mentally. When you can't go outside, when food is low and the sun barely shows up, you pass the time the only way that keeps your soul from freezing over, with stories. Skalds, the Viking poets, were the memory keepers, the professional talkers. Some were trained, others were just born with loud voices and terrifying memories. They could recite entire lineages, epic poems, and blood-drenched sagas with perfect rhythm and barely a paused breath. You'd think that kind of brain would be better spent solving the whole eternal winter problem. But no, these were artists. Their job was to take reality and carve it into something mythic. Tonight's skald is the old man who smells faintly of sour milk and seal fat. He sits on a low bench, his hands folded like he's about to start knitting, and then he begins, not loudly, but with a deliberate rhythm. The way one might start rocking a cradle. The room falls completely silent. Even the goats stop chewing. He tells the story of Egil, the warrior poet with a skull so thick no axe could break it, of how he drank a king under the table and composed poetry so sharp it supposedly made a grown man weep blood. The tale winds its way through battles and heartbreak, curses, and clever insults. Every few lines, someone near you nods in recognition. They know this one, but that doesn't stop them from hanging on every word, and that's the beauty of it. These stories are old, older than most of the people in the room, but they live here. They belong to this space, this fire, this moment. And when the wind is howling like wolves and the snow is high enough to swallow the barn, these sagas give people something else to hold onto, a world that makes more sense than the one outside. One historical fact: many Viking stories weren't written down until centuries later. They lived through oral tradition, spoken, sung, passed from skald to child to farmer to blacksmith. That's why so many of the sagas we know today feel like whispered echoes of something ancient. They were carved into memory long before they were carved into stone or ink. You lean back, half asleep, but still following the rhythm of the tale. The skald's voice rises and falls like a wave, lifting you along with it. He shifts mid-story into the legend of Freydis, Eric's daughter of Eric the Red, who fought off attackers in the New World with a sword in one hand and a bare chest. Yes, that's the tale. She's said to have scared off warriors by slapping the blade across her own chest and howling like a beast. Is it true? Who cares? It's perfect. There's a debate, of course, among scholars about how historical some of these tales actually are. Did Freydis really do that? Was Egil's skull actually axe-proof? Or were these stories tweaked over generations to inspire, to teach, to entertain? Probably all three. That's the thing about oral tradition. It flexes. It evolves. It adapts to the moment, just like the people huddled around this fire right now. You glance around the room. Kids are half asleep, their heads on their mother's shoulders. One man carves a spoon slowly, absently, without looking, his hands moving in time with the story. A woman mends a pair of mittens. There's a rhythm to it all. These sagas don't interrupt life, they thread through it, like invisible string binding everyone together in one shared mythology. It's community therapy in the form of blood-soaked poetry. And here comes the quirky twist. Some stories were darkly funny. Vikings had a sharp, dry wit that could cut cleaner than a sword. They told tales of tricksters like Loki, whose mistakes caused everything from goats flying over mountains to gods being turned into animals. It wasn't always about glory and doom. Sometimes it was just about laughing when everything else seemed cold and endless. The skald pauses now, letting the room breathe. He looks around, his eyes landing on each face like he's measuring their endurance. He could stop. He probably should. But no one moves. So he dives into a tale of creatures that only appear on the darkest nights. The Mara, shadowy beings that press down on your chest as you sleep, stealing your breath. A shiver goes through the room, and you suddenly remember how uneasy you felt the night before when you couldn't quite catch your breath. Coincidence? You tell yourself yes, but maybe. Don't sleep alone tonight. There's a moment, just before the tale ends, where the silence deepens, like the story has reached down into everyone's chest and taken hold of something ancient. You feel it in your stomach, in your bones. The cold outside is vast, but this warmth of shared story, shared fear, shared laughter, it's the fire that won't go out. And that's how the Vikings survived those endless frozen nights, not just by eating fat and wearing wool, but by feeding their minds. By passing down stories so vivid, they stayed lit inside people's heads, even when the sun stayed hidden. You're not just warmer now, you're a little less alone. The skald ends with a final gravelly line and a grunt of satisfaction. The fire crackles. Someone exhales, long and low. Then slowly life resumes. Someone throws another log on the fire. A baby fusses. Someone else asks about a different tale, one involving sea monsters and a cursed silver ring. But the old man just chuckles and leans back into the shadows. Tomorrow, maybe. Tonight, you pull your fur tighter, lean your head back against the wall, and let the stories drift through your mind like snow falling on a silent world. Morning, or what passes for it, creeps in like a whisper from the edge of a dream. There's no sunrise, just a dim smear of gray along the seam of the longhouse wall where cold light leaks through. You blink awake under a shared fur, pressed between two snoring, wheezing bundles of wool and human breath. The fire has dulled to a bed of glowing ash. Outside, the world is still frozen, still covered in snow, still caught in the grip of a winter that doesn't believe in letting go. And worst of all, the sun still refuses to show up and do its job. You don't realize how much you miss the sun until it's gone for days, then weeks. In some parts of the Viking world, places like northern Norway, Iceland, or Greenland, the sun literally disappears in the winter. We're talking full-on polar night. You could go days, even weeks, without seeing a single beam of sunlight. Just a long, weird twilight stretching over the horizon, like a moody teenager refusing to get out of bed. And it does something to you. You feel it in your bones. Your skin gets pale and tight. Your sleep becomes tangled and restless, and your moods. Let's just say you're not singing folk songs and baking bread with joy in your heart. No one is. This much darkness starts to whisper to your brain in low, growling tones. And the Vikings, for all their toughness, weren't immune. You drag yourself to a sitting position, wrapped like a poorly rolled rug, and notice the silence. Not peaceful silence, dead silence. There's no birdsong, no footsteps outside, no soft thunk of a tool on wood, just the sound of breathing. People are moving more slowly, staring longer at the fire. A kid near the door sits rocking back and forth with no particular rhythm. You recognize that look. Cabin fever, the original kind. This wasn't just a cozy Netflix kind of winter. This was months without light, without fresh air, without much stimulation beyond storytelling and the occasional hallucination. The Vikings had to adapt. Their internal clocks went fuzzy, sleep schedules turned weird, and time stopped behaving. Like time, days melted into each other. People woke up in the middle of the night and stayed awake for hours, or they slept in bursts 4 hours here, 3 hours there. Monophasic sleep? Never heard of her. And here comes the historical fact. Viking society functioned under a kind of seasonal rhythm. In the winter months, many daily tasks slowed or paused altogether. Raiding was limited. Farming was impossible. People conserved energy. Instead of following the sun, they followed the hearth. Activity centered around firelight, not daylight. There are even suggestions that people shifted into different roles in winter. More crafting, mending, weaving. Storytelling. Less action. More preservation. But here's the odd part. Scholars still debate how exactly the Vikings coped with the darkness mentally. Did they suffer from seasonal depression? Probably, but they didn't call it that. They might have blamed spirits, gods, or bad omens. Maybe they just called it the winter mood and tried to push through. Some researchers think they turned to rituals, burning special herbs, offering tokens to the gods, or even sacrificing animals to ask for sunlight's return. Others think they just drank more and told creepier stories. You shuffle toward the hearth. Muscles aching, head heavy. There's something eerie about moving through a room lit only by the occasional fire glow and the gray smear of the sky outside. The world feels paused, suspended. You glance at your hands and notice how pale they look, like you're slowly turning into snow yourself. The elders might have had ways to fight it, songs to chase the gloom, chants to invite the sun back. Or they'd build bigger fires and gather everyone in the main room, cramming people close together so no one had space to sink too far into their own mind. Human warmth was psychological. And then the quirky fact. Some Vikings used sunstones, crystals like Iceland spar, to locate the sun even when it wasn't visible. These stones could refract light and show you the sun's direction through cloud cover or even snow haze. It's debated how effective they really were, or whether they were reserved for navigators and sea captains. But the idea that people had magical rocks to find a missing sun? That's the kind of lore you'd believe. After your third week of darkness, you wrap your cloak tighter and step outside, even though every instinct in your body screams at you not to. The snow crunches underfoot with a hollow, icy sound. The sky is a low-hanging sheet of gray, so thick and smothering it feels like it might collapse and bury the world. There's no sun, just a faint, lighter patch barely noticeable. But the day is pretending to exist. You stare at it, daring it to warm your face, but it doesn't care. The trees groan in the wind. The barn is half buried in snowdrifts. A distant dog barks once and falls silent. Even your breath sounds tired, and yet, you can't help but feel a little proud. You're still here, not cheerful, not thriving, but here. You've survived another sunless night, another day of cold, gray waiting. Back inside, someone is lighting a second fire, trying to create more brightness in the room. Another person's arranging polished pieces of bone in the shape of runes, maybe hoping for guidance or distraction. No one mentions the sun. It's like saying its name out loud will jinx its eventual return. You lie back down, eyes half closed, listening to the murmurs of people finding ways to pass the time. There's something strangely intimate about surviving this much darkness together. It makes you honest, quiet, a little weird. Maybe that's what makes Viking winters bearable. Not strength or warmth, but community. You fall asleep wondering if the sun ever feels guilty for abandoning you. Probably not. You're dreaming of warmth, a field in the sun, honey on bread, someone laughing just out of view, and then something shifts. Not in the dream, but in the room. A sound, low-dragged and abominable, not quite the wind, not the animals, something else. You blink awake slowly, the world still blurry and gray, and there it is again, a muffled thump from outside. Then silence. Then another, closer this time, deliberate, heavy. You sit up, heart tapping a little faster in your chest. At least you think it's your heart. No one else has noticed yet, or maybe they're pretending not to. Vikings didn't just fear the cold. They feared what might come with the cold. After all, when your nights stretch endlessly and the wind never stops whispering, it's easy to start believing it's whispering to something. And in the old stories, the ones told in low voices around the fire, there are creatures that listen. Things that move in the dark when humans can't. Things that wait for the light to disappear. You throw on your cloak and step carefully toward the door. No one stops you. That's the rule in winter. If someone's brave enough to check a sound, you let them. The latch creaks. You pull the door open, just wide enough to see, and there's nothing. Just snow, pale and shapeless in the half-light. No footprints, no figures, only the wind making strange shapes of the snowbanks. But then, just as you're about to close the door, you hear it again. A low growl, not animal, not exactly human either. And this time it doesn't sound distant at all. It sounds like it's waiting. You step back inside quickly and bar the door. Nobody laughs. Nobody says it was just a dream or an echo. They've all heard the stories too. This is Draugr season, the time when the dead walk. The Draugr aren't your average ghosts. They're not see-through, not wispy. They're reanimated corpses, bloated, cold, reeking of seawater and moss. Dead Vikings who didn't stay buried because something pulled them back. They crawl from their mounds, angry, jealous. Of the living, full of spite and ice and curses. They break into homes, they crush sleeping people in their beds. They bring with them the cold and worse. Bad luck that sticks around even after they're gone. You glance toward the rafters, where the old bones hang, tiny animal skulls tied with twine, old charms carved with runes, dried herbs that crackle softly in the heat. These are protections, you're told. Offerings, warnings. The bones of a raven to confuse the Draugri's sense of direction. A scrap of iron to block its path. You hope it's enough. Here's a true historical nugget. Viking burial sites sometimes included protective measures to prevent the dead from returning. Stones placed over the chest to weigh down the body, iron. Scissors tucked into the grave, nails driven into the soles of the feet to keep the corpse from walking. That wasn't metaphor. That was insurance. Back by the fire, someone starts telling a story. Not a saga this time, a cautionary tale. About a man who died in the deep of winter and was buried too shallow because the ground was frozen solid. They say he came back 3 nights later, face purple, eyes missing, banging on the door until someone dared open it. They say he walked the fields for weeks before anyone found the courage to burn his bones. The room has gone deathly quiet. Even the child chewing on a wooden spoon has stopped. This is how fear works out here. It creeps in like the cold soft at first, then overwhelming. And the worst part is, there's no way to prove it wrong. You can't go out and check the graveyard. It's snowed in, covered, forgotten until spring. So anything could be out there. Anyone. There's a scholarly debate about how literal the Vikings were about these undead legends. Some experts think the Draugr were symbolic representations of unburied guilt, unfinished business, or generational trauma. Others believe people really thought the dead could rise, especially those who were wronged, disgraced, or buried improperly. Based on the elaborate burial customs and stories passed down, it's safe to say somebody was taking the whole restless dead thing seriously. And of course, there were other things to worry about too. The Mara, the spirit that rides your chest in the night. The Huldra, the forest spirit with a hollow back and a cow's tail. Trolls that live in mountains and cause avalanches when disturbed. But the Draugr, they were special. Because they were once you. A Viking, strong, fierce, and now twisted into something cold and hollow. Someone tosses a pinch of ash into the fire, a ritual gesture. Others murmur little charms, words passed down from parents and grandparents. You find yourself repeating them too, though you barely understand them. They taste like iron and old snow on your tongue. The door stays barred tonight. 2 people volunteer to stay awake in shifts, watching the fire, listening for movement. Everyone else curls up again, furs pulled tight, feet tucked close to the warmth of others. You try to sleep, but you keep thinking about that sound, that growl, the absence of tracks. You close your eyes and see a face, bloated and blue, framed in ice. Just a story, you tell yourself. Then again, so is Ragnarok once. You drift off in the uneasy half-sleep of someone who knows the door may not be enough. Who knows that sometimes winter doesn't just want you cold. It wants you gone. You wake up to creaking above you. Not the regular groaning of the roof under snow. This is different. This creaking has a pattern to it, like slow footsteps shifting. Wait. You hold your breath and listen harder. Nothing. Just the distant pop of the hearth and someone snoring gently across the room. You tell yourself it's the wind or the wood settling. Or maybe one of the goats managed to get on the roof. Somehow. Don't laugh, it's happened. But the uneasy part of your brain doesn't buy it. Because you remember what someone said last night. The ancestors live in the rafters. In the soft and settling stillness of Viking winter, spiritual survival isn't just tradition. It's policy. These people believed in a world stacked in layers. The living, the dead, and the somewhere in between. The Longhouse wasn't just a home. It was a meeting point between realms. And in the long cold nights when everything physical feels brittle and uncertain, the spiritual starts to bleed through. You sit up slowly, scanning the shadows above. Wooden beams crisscross the ceiling like the ribs of a ship, blackened with decades of smoke and soot. Tucked up there are bundles of dried herbs, tools, small woven charms, and bones. Tiny ones, birds, maybe a mouse, maybe not a mouse. You're not sure, and you're not asking. These aren't decorations. They're offerings, wards, symbols. In this house, the dead are never far. Vikings believed that ancestors could protect you or punish you, depending on how you behaved. Keep the hearth burning, maintain the rituals, honor the dead, and you'll be watched over. But forget the traditions, disrespect the old ways, and, well, creaking in the rafters might be the least of your problems. There's a worn post near the center of the room, thicker than the others, darker, smoother to the touch. That's the Gnavegisler, the high seat post. It's more than just a support beam, it's sacred. Carved with symbols you can't quite make out, stained with years of hands brushing against it in passing. Legend says some of these posts held relics of the family line, fragments of bone, hair, or ashes, hidden inside and passed down like secrets. Not just a post, then, but a vessel. A presence. Historical fact. When Norse settlers left their homelands to cross the sea, especially to Iceland, they sometimes threw their high seat posts overboard as they neared land. Wherever the sea carried the posts ashore, that's where they would build their new home. It wasn't about luck. It was about guidance, trusting their fate to the spirits in the wood. You shift uneasily, remembering how you leaned against that post last night to warm your back. You wonder if someone noticed. You wonder if someone should have warned you first. But then again, maybe that's part of it, being tested. The ancestors didn't protect the lazy or the clueless. If you wanted their favor, you had to show you deserved it. And that meant rituals, simple ones mostly. Keep the fire fed. Speak their names aloud. Pour a few drops of ale into the earth as an offering. Don't throw bones into the fire, burning. Animal bones could offend certain spirits. Don't whistle after dark. Don't sing loudly during storms. Basically, don't act like a disrespectful idiot and expect the ghosts of your warrior grandparents to babysit you. The woman across the fire is braiding her hair slowly. You watch her, waiting for someone to explain what happened last night, what they all think happened. No one brings it up. No one mentions the sound on the roof, the stories of the Draugr. This is how the community deals with fear, quietly, carefully. It's not about denying it. It's about not inviting it. The air inside feels heavy today. Not just cold, but dense. You get the feeling that something is being expected of you, but you don't know what. Someone hands you a chunk of dried fish, a hunk of cold bread. You chew without tasting. It's not about flavor. It's about not dying. Here's a quirky Viking detail for you. Sometimes, they kept the skulls of animals or people tucked in the corners of the longhouse for luck or protection. A horse skull behind the wall, a goat's head on a post. The logic: if an animal gave its life to feed or serve the household, its spirit might continue to protect it. So the bones stayed close. Sometimes a little too close. There's a debate among scholars about how literally the Vikings treated these practices. Some argue that the belief in spirits and ancestors was more symbolic, meant to unify families, reinforce traditions, keep people behaving. Others insist these weren't just stories for comfort. They were serious cosmological truths. Not metaphors, real dangers, real rules. You didn't believe because it was quaint. You believed because you'd seen too many people break the rules and not wake up the next morning. That you step outside later that afternoon, needing air, even if it hurts to breathe it. The snow is silent. There are no tracks, just white stretching out in all directions, smoothed flat by the wind. Above you, the sky is pale and low, almost greenish with frost. You stare up at the roof of the longhouse, half expecting to see a shadow clinging there. Nothing. But the wood up top is disturbed, cracked, split slightly, like something pressed down hard from above. You go back inside without speaking. Later, before bed, someone leaves a bowl of porridge near the door. Not for the dogs, not for the people. Just placed there, carefully, reverently. You watch it steam in the cold air, the smell drifting toward the open rafters. No one says why. They don't have to. You curl up again, back to the wall, watching the dark above you. The fire crackles, and the bones shift slightly in their bundles. You close your eyes and hope the ancestors are in a good mood tonight. You've survived wolves, snow, hunger, and even Draugr maybe. But surviving the silence of the dead, that takes a different kind of strength. You wake up to laughter. Not wild, chaotic laughter, but the kind that rolls low and warm through the room, like coals glowing under ash. It catches you off guard. Laughter? Here? Now? After weeks of cold and darkness and stories about corpse beasts knocking at your door. But yes, it's real. Someone's chuckling by the fire, and a child giggles through a mouthful of barley mush. Suddenly, the longhouse feels different, brighter, looser. The air, while still sharp with smoke and damp wool, carries something sweeter. Today's Yule, not the red and green jingling bells version. No sleighs, no sweaters, no inflatable reindeer. This is the old Yule, the deep, wild Viking version, half holy day, half full send survival party. And after everything you've endured, it feels like a prize. Yule is more than just a celebration. It's defiance, a midwinter middle finger to the long night. You're still here. You haven't frozen or starved or been dragged off by spirits. So, you feast, you sing, you remember the dead, honor the gods, and drink until your bones stop aching. You sit up slowly, already warmer just from the mood in the room. The fire is blazing, larger than usual, and someone has laid down evergreen boughs across the beams. The smell is sharp and clean, a reminder that something still grows out there. Under the snow, the longhouse has shifted from a shelter into a hall, still cramped, still smoky, but humming with something ancient and electric. People are moving with more energy. Someone's roasting a pig over the fire, its skin crackling and popping like a drumbeat. There are loaves of bread with actual herbs in them flavor. And someone's brought out dried apples and nuts. You didn't even know those were an option. Turns out they've been hoarding them for weeks, saving the good stuff for today. You've got food, fire, and fermented drink. And suddenly you understand why this tradition mattered so much. Yule isn't just about celebrating the present. It's about grabbing onto hope with both frostbitten hands. The solstice is past. The darkest day is behind you. The light is coming back, inch by frozen inch. And the Vikings? They marked that shift with feasting and fire, rituals and riot. Here's your historical anchor. Yule, or Jule, was originally a midwinter festival that predated Christianity. It lasted at least 12 days, sometimes more, depending on who you were and how much ale you had. It was meant to honor the gods, Odin most prominently, but also to remember the dead and strengthen the bonds between the living. Think ancestor veneration meets end-of-the-world potluck. You're handed a wooden cup of mead, warm and sweet, and shockingly strong. It numbs your lips and burns just the right amount going down. Around you, people are clapping, singing old songs in a language you barely follow. A man jumps up and performs a quick, stumbling dance that ends with him knocking over a bench. No one's mad. This is part of it. Laughter keeps you human, but it's not all fun. There's ceremony here too. At the far end of the hall, someone lights a candle and places it in front of a carved wooden idol, rough, crude, but unmistakably divine. Odin, maybe, or Freyr. You're not sure. The figure stares back, its features half lit by flame. Offerings are placed before it. A slice of meat, a splash of ale, a lock of hair. You watch in silence. Even the children go quiet. There's reverence in this chaos. It's not all noise. A woman beside you explains quietly that the celebration is also for the Disir, the female ancestors who watch over the family line. They're honored with toasts, songs, and sometimes blood sacrifices. You nod slowly. You're hoping this year's version stops at toasts and songs. Quirky fact for you. Some Viking families used to keep a Yule log burning continuously through the holiday, believing that if it went out, bad luck or worse would follow. The log had to be chosen carefully, often from sacred trees, and tended like a heartbeat. You look over at the enormous piece of wood resting in the hearth now, split from a long dead oak and smoldering steadily. No one's letting that thing go out. And then come the ghost stories. Because of course, in true Viking fashion, Yule also happens to be the time when the dead walk most freely. It's the wild hunt season. Odin himself is said to ride the sky with a pack of ghostly hunters, sweeping over rooftops with glowing eyes. And howling wolves. If you hear hooves in the night during Yule, you don't look. You don't answer the door. You don't follow. If you do, you may not come back. Scholars still debate whether the wild hunt was seen as a literal danger or more of a cautionary tale. Some say it was a metaphor for winter storms, for the chaos and danger of the season. Others think people really believed spectral riders could snatch your soul if you stepped outside at the wrong moment. Honestly, after living here for this long, you're ready to believe anything. As the night wears on, the mood shifts again, from celebratory to mystical. Someone is reciting a poem, voice low and steady, and the fire dims like it's listening. People close their eyes, the rhythm almost hypnotic. The verses speak of death and rebirth, of winter's grip and the sun's slow return. You don't know the words, but the meaning curls into your chest like smoke. You glance around the room. Faces are flushed with drink and warmth, but eyes are clear, alert. This isn't mindless celebration. It's remembering. All those who didn't survive last winter. All those buried under mounds now iced over and still. All those whose names are still spoken tonight, so they won't be forgotten. You raise your cup, copying the others, and drink deep. Yule isn't joy without a cost, it's joy in spite of the cost. That's what makes it holy. As you fall asleep that night, belly full, cheeks warm, the fire steady, you feel something like peace, the kind that's earned. The kind that only comes after weeks of frost, hunger, fear, and silence. You survived long enough to celebrate, and that, in Viking winter, is a kind of miracle. The Yule fire is still burning the next morning, crackling with stubborn pride, but the celebration has quieted into something more thoughtful. The mead haze is wearing off, and your stomach is full of regret and half-digested pork fat. Outside, the snow has drifted again, soft and deep, muting the world into near silence. The air feels changed though, not just colder but charged. As if the night left behind more than ashes and greasy plates. Something unseen, something watching. You've heard the whispers by now about the Sikona, the wise women, the witches, the ones who speak with the unseen. They say that during Yule, the veil between worlds is thinnest. Spirits pass more easily, dreams grow teeth, and some people, the ones born to it, can tug on the threads of fate with a glance or a chant or a single well-placed bone. Today, the Sikona is visiting. She arrives without fanfare. No wolves, no thunder, no fireballs. Just a dark shape in the snow, wrapped in layered cloaks, walking with a carved staff taller than she is. Her face is lined and unreadable, her eyes sharp and small beneath her hood. You half expect her to vanish the moment you blink, but she doesn't. She steps inside, shakes the snow from her boots, and is immediately given the best seat by the fire. No one speaks until she does. Seer, the magic of the Vikings, was never something to take lightly. It wasn't sleight of hand or party tricks. It was raw, unpredictable, and deeply feared. Practitioners were rare, often isolated, and sometimes even distrusted, especially the men. Magic in Viking society was often seen as a woman's domain. A man who practiced it risked being labeled ergi, unmanly, perverse, shameful. Odin himself, king of the gods, was said to have learned seer from a goddess. Even he caught slack. For the Sikona sits silently, eyes half closed. She could be sleeping or gathering thoughts, or listening to something none of you can hear. Someone offers her a bowl of stew. She doesn't take it. Instead, she unwraps a leather pouch and begins laying things out on the floor. Bones, stones, bits of iron, a small bundle of hair tied with red thread. The room stills. Even the baby stops fussing. You watch with the kind of cautious awe reserved for people who might be able to kill you with a song. She begins to hum. Not a tune exactly, but a rhythm, like the wind mimicking words. Her fingers move in patterns over the objects. Sometimes she speaks. You can't understand the words, but you feel their shape, like smoke coiling inside your ears. And then she calls for someone, not by name, just a gesture. And a woman steps forward, middle-aged, quiet, always watching, but rarely speaking. You've barely noticed her until now. The Sikona looks at her, long and hard. Then she speaks again. This time it sounds like a question. The woman nods once. And just like that, the two of them disappear into the back corner of the longhouse, hidden by firs and shadows. No one comments. You don't ask what it's about. That's not how this works. Historical fact incoming. Seer was often used for divination, healing, cursing, and manipulating fate. A Sikona could bless a birth, curse a rival, or predict the outcome of a voyage. They used chants, galdr, ritual items, and sometimes even animal sacrifice. And while some Norse sources praise these women for their power, others hint at fear, jealousy, and danger. The line between respect and suspicion was razor thin. You shift closer to the fire, pretending you're just cold. Everyone else is doing the same, huddling together under the guise of comfort while really trying to avoid being noticed. There's a tension in the air, like if anyone speaks too loudly, the spell will snap and something hungry will wake up. And here comes the quirky detail. Some Sikona were believed to travel in spirit form during rituals. Their bodies would lie still, trance-like, while their spirits wandered out into the world or other worlds. Some accounts describe this as soul journeying, where a practitioner could speak with the dead, see distant events, or even manipulate weather. You're not saying the Sikona just hexed a snowstorm for fun, but the wind outside has picked up considerably since she arrived. There's an ongoing scholarly debate about whether seer was real in the magical sense, or more psychological, a form of early therapy, community guidance, or placebo healing. Some think the rituals provided a kind of structured catharsis. Others point to shamanistic practices from across the ancient world and say, no, these people weren't pretending. They believed. And when enough people believe something, reality tends to bend around it. The woman returns an hour later, pale and silent. She doesn't speak, just sits down by the hearth, eyes wide and wet. The Sikona follows a moment after, her face blank, her pouch already packed again. She doesn't need thanks, doesn't wait for it. She simply nods at the fire, then at the door, and leaves. And just like that, the room exhales. You sit in that silence for a long time, listening to the fire crackle, watching snow slide down the outer wall in slow, lazy curls. You don't know what changed today, but something did. Maybe a curse lifted. Maybe a message delivered. Maybe a child's sickness given a name and a path to healing. Or maybe nothing. Maybe it was just a performance in a long tradition of performances, meant to give people the illusion of control in a world that refuses to be controlled. But deep down, you don't believe that. Something shifted and the wind outside agrees. Later, that night, someone tells a story about a Sikona who turned a Viking warrior into a wolf for refusing to honor his dead father. Another swears their grandmother saw a Sikona raise a storm so wild it tore the roof off a longhouse. Someone else just nods slowly, eyes fixed on the dancing fire. You wrap yourself in your cloak and lie back down. Magic or not, the world feels heavier, but you feel safer. Like someone's guarding the threshold now. Someone who doesn't need weapons to fight. You fall asleep dreaming of strange runes drawn in ash and snow, and a voice whispering secrets you'll never quite remember. Sleep doesn't last long. Not because of fear this time, or a cold draft sneaking in under the furs, but because someone is sharpening a blade. The sound is unmistakable, slow, rhythmic metal on stone. And it pulls you from your dreams like a hand gripping your collar. You open your eyes to flickering firelight and a long, lean shadow moving across the far wall. One of the men, young, broad-shouldered, face half hidden beneath a straggly beard, is seated with his sword laid across his lap, working the edge with patient care. Not frantic, not angry, just focused. And you know what that means? They're training today, even now. Even in this, snow piled high outside, the wind howling like it's in mourning, and temperatures low enough to make steel scream if left too long in the open. None of that matters. Vikings didn't stop preparing for war just because the world was frozen. In fact, winter was often the best time to train. Less farming, fewer distractions. And what better way to stay warm than swinging a weapon around? Like you mean it? You sit up and groan softly as your joints complain. Your muscles ache, but it's not the "I walked too far" kind of ache. It's the kind that comes from constantly bracing your body against cold. Still, curiosity nudges you forward. You pull on your boots, your cloak, your gloves, and then some other poor soul's gloves on top of yours. Nobody's checking, and step outside. The light stabs your eyes at first, not sunlight. There's no such thing anymore. But the white snow reflects enough of the gray sky to make everything glow faintly, as if the entire world were lit from beneath by some cold, cruel lamp. You trudge toward the open area behind the longhouse, where a dozen or so figures are gathered. Men, women, even one older teen who looks like he's only recently stopped crying when his toes get cold. They're holding spears, axes, wooden training swords. One man is shirtless, of course. There's always one. Steam rises off his bare back like he's made of volcano and bad decisions. Today, the drills begin with shield walls. Classic. You've seen this in stories, maybe in movies, but seeing it up close is different. It's not elegant, not glamorous. It's loud, chaotic, messy. People slam into each other with real force, testing the grip of the ice beneath their feet. They shout, they grunt, they fall. One woman slips, drops her shield, and nearly gets trampled. No one stops. She gets up fast, shaking snow from her hair, and gets back in formation. That's the point. Winter warfare wasn't some romantic snowflake glittered ballet, it was survival with spikes. If you could fight in this, if you could win in this, you could do anything. Here's your history drop. Vikings didn't pause their campaigns in winter the way some civilizations did. While sailing was limited, frozen harbors and rough seas put a damper on that. Land-based raids and territorial skirmishes still happened, especially in local conflicts where snow-covered forests could serve as ambush points and frozen lakes. Made for fast, direct routes to enemy settlements. Snow was a tool. Ice was strategy. Back in the training yard, or really, a clearing in the snow made by feet and shovels. Someone showing off a pair of Langzixes, long single-edged knives. He swings them in a wide arc, carving the air, then sticks both into a frozen log and takes a breath. Nearby, two others spar with wooden staffs, their grunts punctuated by the thwack of impact and the occasional yelp when a blow lands too hard. No helmets today, just thick skulls and pure ego. But it's not all. Brute strength. You notice one of the older warriors running drills for the youngest fighters, having them walk silently in a crouch, holding their breath, balancing stones on the backs of their hands. Stealth, agility, balance all crucial if you plan to sneak up on someone whose entire house is literally listening for threats in the dark. And now, the quirky bit. Vikings were likely early users of skis in combat. Not the Olympic downhill kind, but narrow wooden skis that let them glide over snow faster than any poor foot-slogging soldier could manage. There are sagas describing ski troops, warriors trained to move swiftly over the snow, arrows at the ready. Some historians think this gave them a massive winter advantage, especially in surprise raids. There's still debate, of course. Some argue that ski combat was rare, more the stuff of heroic exaggeration than daily warfare. Others point to archaeological finds of ski fragments and stylized carvings that suggest winter mobility was no joke. Either way, it makes you look at the snow-covered field with new eyes. What seems like a hindrance could easily become a weapon. You take a staff when someone offers it and get in line. Half committed. Your first swing is slow and wide, sloppy. You nearly hit your own knee, but no one mocks you. Everyone here was terrible once. A woman across from you. You realize she's a woman once she lifts her hood, grins. She jabs low. You block too high. She taps your ribs. You try not to yelp. After 10 minutes, your hands are numb. After 20, they're on fire. After 30, you've forgotten you were ever cold. That's the trick. Movement isn't just exercise. It's survival. It keeps your blood flowing, your limbs alert, your fear quiet. When you fight in the cold, you stop being cold. You become something else. A furnace wrapped in frozen leather and grim determination. The drill ends with everyone forming a loose circle. They toss snow into the air, shouting a chant that sounds part battle cry, part joke. Someone slips and falls flat on their back. Laughter erupts. The firewood pile groans under the weight of fresh snow, and for a moment, the world feels light again. You walk back to the longhouse, sore but energized, carrying the staff like it belongs to you now. Your breath fogs in front of you, and for once, you're not trying to outrun the cold. You've met it head-on, wrestled with it, maybe even earned its respect. Inside, the fire feels warmer than usual, not because it's burning hotter, but because you are. And when the next storm comes, and it will, you'll be ready. You wake to a sound you haven't heard in weeks. Laughter. Small, shrill, and unstoppable. Not from the warriors or the elders or the overworked women who never stop spinning wool. This time it's coming from the smallest creatures in the longhouse, the children. And not just one, either. It's a pack of them, tumbling like wolf pups across the rush-strewn floor, bundled in so many layers of wool and fur that they bounce when they fall. Someone throws a crust of stale bread, and two of them scramble for it like it's a rare jewel. It is, in its own way. You sit up slowly, watching them with equal parts amusement and disbelief. How are they not frozen solid? How are they even awake? But of course, this is their world. Born into winter, raised under dark skies and surrounded by smoke and steam and stories, they don't know anything else. While you've been surviving, they've been living loudly, violently, joyfully. Childhood in the Viking Age wasn't all sword practice and tiny horned helmets, though you do spot one kid with a makeshift helmet made from a bent cooking pot. It's adorable and terrifying. But really, it was a constant tug of war between play and work. And in the deep winter, when there were fewer chores to do and not much space to run, imagination exploded like frost on glass dew. Two boys are locked in a fierce duel, using carved sticks as swords, complete with sound effects that are all way too enthusiastic. A girl sits in the corner, weaving something with surprising precision, tiny fingers flying. She's probably spun more wool in her 9 years than you will in your entire life. Another child, barely out of toddlerhood, is dragging a chicken around by the foot. The chicken seems mildly resigned. Viking kids didn't get much in the way of luxury. Toys were carved from bone or wood, simple things. Horses, ships, figurines, sometimes whistles or spinning tops. Nothing fancy, but everything mattered. A carved figure could become a warrior, a god, a dragon. A bone could be a rattle or a game piece or a blunt projectile when negotiations between siblings failed. One of the girls tosses a handful of snow into a boy's hood while he's not looking. He turns indignant and launches a counterattack with snow mixed with bits of hay. They're screaming, they're running, someone's tripping over a sleeping dog. No one intervenes. The adults barely glance up. This is the noise of life continuing. Let them scream. Historically, Viking children had to grow up fast. Infant mortality was high. About half of all children didn't survive past age 5. That meant those who did live were tough. Not in the they eat dirt and never cry kind of way, though they probably did eat dirt, but in the they haul water at 6, herd goats at 7, and can gut a fish by 8 kind of way. But even so, winter gave them something precious: time. With farming paused, travel dangerous, and most of the adults stuck inside, the children had more freedom to play, to observe, to learn by osmosis. You notice one boy watching intently as an elder sharpens a blade, mimicking the motion with a wooden stick. Another listens as 2 women recite a saga, eyes wide, lips silently mouthing the lines. These aren't distractions. They're training. Cultural downloads. Norse education. Here's a historical gem. Some sagas and archaeological finds suggests that Viking children were given miniature versions of adult tools, not just for play, but for early skill building. Tiny axes, toy boats, even scaled-down shields. The line between game and preparation was thin. That pretend sword fight over by the hearth? It might be fun now, but in a few years, it'll be muscle memory when real danger comes. One boy slips and smacks his head against a beam. He doesn't cry. He just looks around quickly to see if anyone noticed, then goes back to throwing pine cones. You make eye contact. He grins, gap-toothed, like a wolf cub who knows he'll own the forest one day. And now for the quirky fact, Viking lullabies were dark. Like, go to sleep or trolls will steal your eyes dark. Many Old Norse bedtime songs were meant less to soothe than to warn about wolves, about the sea, about ghosts. One reconstructed lullaby actually includes a line about ravens coming to peck at the bones of naughty children. Sweet dreams, right? But that's the thing. Fear was baked into childhood here. Not to scar kids, but to teach them. The world was dangerous. The cold could kill. The woods held secrets. So the stories and songs weren't designed to protect kids from fear. They taught kids how to live with it, to laugh at it, to grow teeth of their own. You watch as one of the older children gathers the rest into a circle and begins telling a tale. Not reading from a book. There are no books here, but from memory. His voice rises and falls in perfect imitation of the skald. The story is a familiar one. Something about a hero tricking a frost giant and stealing back the sun. You lean in. Unconsciously. Everyone does. Even the baby dragging the chicken stops and listens. There's some debate among scholars about just how much agency Viking children had. Some argue they were expected to be miniature adults as early as possible. Others think their play was encouraged, even cherished, as long as it didn't interfere with work or survival. But from what you've seen, it's not either or. These kids play hard, but they also learn through it. Every game, every story, every chore is building someone who can swing an axe by 12 and run a household by 15. The snow outside keeps falling. The world is still locked in ice. But inside the longhouse, you see the future running barefoot across the floor, chasing a goat with a stick, giggling at ghosts, and reciting stories like they were born knowing them. You smile to yourself, rubbing the soreness from your hands, and settle back against the wall. Let the children be loud today. The winter is still long, but now you know it's not lifeless. It's just making room for the next generation of survivors. You start to notice it more now, the silence. Not just the peaceful, no one's yelling kind of silence. This is deeper, older. It's the kind of silence that feels like it's listening to you. And after weeks of smoke, laughter, children fighting over goat bones, and the general din of people living shoulder to shoulder in one big wooden loaf of a house, the quiet is suddenly sharp. It starts in the early hours. The fire's low, the room's still, and for a few minutes you hear nothing. No shifting bodies, no coughs, no crackling of wood. Just the sound of the wind pushing itself around outside, trying to find a way in. And then you realize that is the sound. The wind, creaking wood, the occasional thump of snow sliding off the roof. It becomes your soundtrack, a kind of cold, slow music you didn't sign up for. And it's not just the longhouse. When you step outside, you hear it even more. Snow deadens everything. It swallows footsteps, hides the rustling of animals, and mutes the crash of branches bending under ice. You find yourself holding your breath more often, walking slower, listening harder. Out here, silence isn't peaceful. It's suspense, like the world is paused and is waiting to see what you'll do next. There's a forest nearby, thick with pine and birch, and one morning you're sent to collect kindling along its edge. You go alone, bundled and begrudging, boots crunching over the hard-packed trail. But when you reach the trees, something shifts. The air feels heavier. The sound of your own footsteps grows louder. And then, when you stop moving, the silence hits full force, so complete it feels unnatural. You look around, half expecting to see someone watching. You don't, but the trees seem to lean in anyway. And then you hear it something. A creak? A snap? No, just snow slipping from a branch somewhere deeper in the woods. Still, it puts a knot in your gut. You gather your kindling quickly and leave without turning your back on the forest. 1. Historical detail worth knowing. Vikings believed the natural world was alive. Not metaphorically, but literally. Forests had spirits, mountains had moods. Waterfalls could speak if you listened hard enough. This wasn't superstition, it was survival. If a part of the land felt wrong, you didn't argue. You left, or you left an offering and begged it not to notice you. The silence in the woods wasn't emptiness, it was presence. That idea has stuck, even with modern scholars. Some argue that Viking spirituality wasn't just about gods and afterlives, but about this intimate relationship with their surroundings. The land wasn't a backdrop. It was a character, a dangerous one. Others say we romanticize it too much, that people were mostly practical and stories about spirits were just old-school ways to explain landslides, Volf attacks, or why Bjorn fell into a frozen lake without warning. But either way, the belief shaped behavior. And you, right now, are walking faster because of it. Back at the longhouse, you notice how the silence carries inside, too. Some days, especially during snowstorms, people grow quieter. The wind roars against the outer walls, but inside, voices drop. Conversations turn to murmurs. You get the sense that no one wants to be too loud. Not because they're scared, though maybe they are, but because the silence is a kind of guest now unwelcome, but respected. You take a seat near the fire and close your eyes. You try to block everything out, and then you realize there's sound. In the silence, not dramatic, nothing obvious. Just the groaning of wood, the tick of embers collapsing, the slow sigh of someone sleeping. It's almost a lullaby. A reminder that the house is alive in its own way, breathing and stretching and creaking as it holds everyone together. Quirky fact incoming. Vikings believed houses could have spirits, called husvedir. These weren't ghosts or gods, but protectors of the home. If treated well, they kept fires from going out and doors from freezing shut. If neglected, they might cause illness, ruin food, or make sure your bootlaces snapped just as you stepped into snow up to your neck. You respected your house because it watched you dot at night. The silence deepens, not metaphorically, literally. With no sunlight, no chirping insects, no machines, and no nightlife beyond snoring, the darkness becomes a weight. You lie under the furs and try not to breathe too loud. Even the fire seems to dim its own noise. And in that stillness, your mind starts to drift. You remember sounds from your past: running water, bird calls, city traffic, buzzing lights, and you realize just how many of those noises were a kind of background safety net. How here you get nothing, and that nothing is unsettling. You ask someone the next morning if they ever get used to the silence. The man stares at you, shrugs, and says, "No, but it's better than screaming." You don't ask him to explain. Some of the children make noise just for the sake of it, banging sticks together, singing nonsense songs, throwing things and howling with glee. The adults rarely stop them. Maybe they recognize that instinct. Fight the silence before it gets under your skin. There's another scholarly debate about just how much sound shaped Viking daily life. Some suggest that in a world without engines or electricity, people's senses were sharper. They noticed small sounds, changes in animal behavior, the pitch of the wind, the way snow crunched under different kinds of boots. Others argue that people simply adjusted, tuning out the world to focus on survival. Either way, there's no denying it. When the world is this quiet, every creak, every breath, every shift in the air matters. That night, as the wind dies down and the snow hangs silent in the air like held breath, you lie awake longer than usual. You're not cold, not hungry, not afraid, just still. And in that stillness, something in you clicks. A weird, quiet understanding. The silence isn't empty. It's full of everything that used to be here, and everything still trying to be. You exhale slowly. The fire crackles once, softly, and the house creaks in response, like it heard you. It starts as a joke. One of the boys grabs a bucket of boiling water, runs outside, and hurls it into the frigid air. And just like that, poof, instant snow. The water turns to a cloud of white mist and ice crystals before it even hits the ground. Everyone cheers, partly because it's cool, partly because you've all been bored for days, and partly because any excuse to be outside doing something that doesn't involve hauling firewood or scraping ice off the door is a win. You stand by the doorway, watching the boy's face glow with pride. It's not just about the trick, though it is objectively awesome. It's that little moment where you turn the cold into something fun, something you control. And in Viking winter, that's a rare feeling. The others catch on fast. Soon there's a line forming, each person boiling water over the hearth, carefully not spilling any, then running out with it, cradled in both hands like a holy relic. Then comes the toss, the hiss, the explosion of tiny crystals that sparkle in the air and vanish before they hit the snow dot. It becomes an unspoken contest. Who can make the biggest mist cloud? Who throws it best? Who can run the farthest in the least clothing and still get the water airborne before it freezes solid? Someone, predictably, gets overconfident and ends up with lukewarm slush all over their boots. They laugh. Everyone does. And for the first time in days, you're not just surviving. You're playing. It gets you thinking. The Vikings must have had their own ways of pushing back against the cold with mischief. Not rebellion, exactly, just little acts of defiance, humor, stunts. Stupid risks for the sake of a story. Because let's be honest, when the sun disappears for months, and you live in a wooden box full of snoring relatives and goat stench, throwing hot water into the sky just to see it vanish feels like therapy. And here comes your historical fact of the day. The Vikings weren't strangers to spectacle. Sure, they're famous for their raids and their ships and their fire-forged faces, but they also had games. Physical competitions, endurance contests, and yes, even snow sports. Wrestling was big, stone lifting, tug of war. Some sagas even describe swimming in freezing water or racing barefoot across ice. Not because they had to, because they could. You imagine a group of young Vikings daring each other to stand in a frozen stream until someone taps out, racing across a frozen lake wearing nothing but their underwear and bad decisions. Did they have boiling water tricks? Who knows? But given The way they seem to treat frostbite like a casual inconvenience, you wouldn't be surprised. There's even a quirky fact hiding in an old saga. A character brags about being able to piss a hole in the snow deep enough to bury an axe. It's not clear if this was supposed to impress someone or if it was just ancient locker room talk, but the message is clear. Cold or not, they owned it. You try your own water toss later that morning, half expecting to trip on the ice and die, in the most avoidable way possible. But instead, you watch the steam burst upward like some ethereal spirit. For half a second it hangs in the air, then vanishes. White, weightless, gone. The group cheers. You bow like an idiot dot, and then someone points out that the air is really dry. Too dry. They say the snow isn't good snow. It's the kind that squeaks. Underfoot, powdery, brittle, refusing to clump. Bad for sledding, worse for building anything. You hadn't noticed before, but they're right. It squeaks like old leather under your boots. Here's where things get unexpectedly interesting. Cold. Weather science. You wouldn't think the Vikings were much into meteorology, but they were experts at reading the environment. They could tell how long a freeze would last based on the shape of hoarfrost, or predict snow squalls by watching how smoke rose from the fire. No thermometers, no forecasts, just centuries of paying very close attention. Some scholars think the Vikings used these weather reading skills in travel planning. Before setting out on a journey, they'd examine cloud movement, snow, patterns, and even animal behavior to guess whether they'd get stuck in a storm. It wasn't always accurate. There are plenty of tales about ships getting iced in unexpectedly, but it worked often enough to become tradition. You try it yourself, stepping back from the boiling water Olympics to squint at the sky. It's pale, hazy, and seems to glow faintly at the edges like a candle behind frosted glass. A man beside you mutters, "There'll be ice fog tonight." You nod, pretending you know what that means. He grins and adds, "Stick your boots under the blanket, or you'll spend the morning cursing." By midday, your face aches from smiling too much, your fingers are stiff, and your legs feel like you ran a marathon in a snowstorm while being heckled by ghosts. You head back inside with the others, trailing slush and laughter behind you. The longhouse smells like stew again, this time with something that almost resembles garlic, and the fire is roaring, casting orange flickers across every smoke-darkened surface. Later, as you sit by the fire, nursing a bruised shin and thawing your gloves, someone mentions the coldest night they ever survived. Not a joke this time, real fear. They talk about a wind so strong it stripped bark off trees, and a storm that buried 2 houses in snow so deep it days to dig them out. No one interrupts. This story isn't for applause. It's a reminder. You glance at your boots drying by the hearth. A thin sheen of ice clings to the edges. The warmth here is precious, yes, but temporary. And yet, today you didn't just endure the cold, you laughed in its face. You turned it into a game. And maybe that's the secret. Not brute strength, not endless layers of wool and leather and fat, but play, curiosity, that strange rebellious joy that dares to say, "Yes, it's freezing, but I'm still going to toss boiling water into the sky just to watch it fly." You fall, asleep, grinning, your cheek still tingling from the wind, and your dreams full of steam, snow, and the sound of your own laughter echoing into the frost. You don't think much of it at first. Just a sound, soft, rhythmic, distant. A kind of scraping, like leather on wood, muffled beneath the snowpack. You're standing outside the longhouse, tugging at the latch on the barn door. cursing at the ice, jamming it shut again when the noise reaches you. Not the wind, not a wolf, something else. Something man-made. You pause, hand frozen mid-motion, and then you hear it again. She dot dot she dot, dot she dot dot. And then, out of the trees, they glide into view. Skiers. Actual Viking skiers. They come in pairs. Tall shapes hunched slightly forward. Long wooden boards strapped to their feet. Poles tucked under arms like spears. They move with eerie grace. No bouncing, no huffing. Just a smooth, gliding momentum that makes them seem half spirit, half human. Their cloaks ripple behind them, boots lash tight, and their breath steams like dragon smoke. You stand there, slack-jawed, as they pass, barely sparing you a glance. And then they're gone, slipping back into the forest. Like snow ghosts. You blink a few times and laugh under your breath. Of course the Vikings figured out how to travel across this frozen nightmare in style. You finally manage to wrench the barn door open and go about your chore. But the image of those skiers sticks in your brain all day. Back inside, you ask about them, and someone shrugs like it's the most normal thing in the world. Ski patrol, the woman says, not joking. They check traps, scout paths, visit other farms. You nod slowly, trying to process the idea of Viking winter patrols on skis. Then someone mentions they also hunt like that. Stealthy, fast, efficient. Try sneaking up on a deer in 3 feet of snow without skis. Good luck, the historical record backs it up. Viking-age Scandinavians were using skis for centuries before the rest of Europe caught on. There are even preserved ski fragments from as far back as 500 CE, with bindings and grooved undersides. Primitive but clever. Skiing wasn't just for sport. It was transportation, warfare, survival, and not just in emergencies. Some Vikings trained with skis the way others trained with swords, especially in mountainous regions where snow didn't politely melt after a few days. People learned to use skis like extensions of their own legs. The Norse word sky literally means split piece of wood, but in practice, it meant power. You step outside later that day with your usual boots and your usual regret slipping on ice, stomping through drifts, and muttering curses you hope the ancestors won't hold against you. That's when one of the ski patrol types spots you, nods, and after a long silent appraisal, tosses a pair of old skis at your feet. No ceremony, no explanation, just a gesture that says, figure it out. You strap them on using a mess of leather and cold fingers. The first time you try to glide, you tip sideways and fall straight into a snowbank. The second time, same, but colder. By the fourth time, you're moving, barely. You're wobbling like a deer on stilts, arms flailing, legs crossing in what can only be described as stylized chaos. But you're moving faster than you would on foot, and that counts as a victory. One of the patrolmen skis past you backward, just to show off. He doesn't say anything. He doesn't have to. You spend the afternoon practicing, not because you were asked, but because something in you can't let this go. You want to move like they do, carving the cold, gliding like wind. You fall, you bleed a little, you swear a lot. But each time, it gets a little easier. Back at the longhouse, you're bruised. Knees and snow-stuffed gloves get you a mix of mockery and admiration. Someone offers you a drink. Someone else offers you a boiled sock. You're not sure which is the joke. That night, as you thaw by the fire, you hear another story. This one about a Viking scout who traveled 30 miles on skis to warn a nearby village of a raid. They say he beat the attackers by half a day. The locals were ready. The raiders weren't. The scout didn't survive the battle, but his skis were preserved in the hall as a symbol of loyalty. Or maybe just to remind everyone that heroism sometimes looks like frozen blisters and bruised ribs. There's debate among historians about how widespread ski warfare really was. Some argue it was limited to specific regions, like the Sami of the far north, who were expert skiers long before the Vikings adopted the practice. Others think the Norse quickly adapted, integrating skis into patrol and defense strategies during winter months. Either way, it left an impression. Tales of ski warriors made it into the sagas, where characters raced across snowfields like winter gods. And here's the quirky fact of the day. Ski wax. Yes, really. Some Viking-era skiers used a kind of rudimentary wax made from animal fat or pine resin to reduce friction. It's not exactly Olympic-grade tech, but for its time, brilliant. If you're going to skate through blizzards like a ghost in a cloak, you might as well do it efficiently. As you peel off your boots later and inspect the damage blisters, bruises, something that might be frostnip, you feel it again. That strange pride. You didn't master skiing in one day, of course not, but you got closer to the land. Closer to the people who've been doing this their whole lives. Closer to a version of yourself that doesn't panic every time your foot sinks into a snowbank. Tomorrow, you'll try again. And maybe, just maybe, you'll be the one gliding past the longhouse next time. Breath misting in the air, skis whispering. Over the snow, looking like you were born to ride the ice. You wake in the dark and don't know what time it is. Could be midnight, could be 4 in the afternoon. Time in winter has officially given up. The fire's low, casting long shadows across the rafters, and everyone around you is sleeping, sort of. Some snore, others mumble. A few lie motionless, eyes wide open, staring into the dark like they've been swallowed by it. You sit up slowly, feeling the ache in your back and the familiar chill nipping at your toes. You try to go back to sleep, you really do, but your mind's too loud. It runs in loops of odd, dream-wrought thoughts. Did you leave your boots too close to the fire? Did you dream about talking snow again? Is someone whispering, or is that just the wind? You pull your blanket tighter and close your eyes. That's when the real problem hits. You're not tired, not in the way you should be. This is how it happens. First, the sun disappears for days, then weeks. You tell yourself you'll just sleep more, maybe hibernate a little. But instead, your rhythms collapse. You wake up at odd hours, can't sleep when you should, sleep too deeply when you shouldn't, and drift into weird, half-waking dreams full of shadows and snow and things with too many eyes. Welcome to Viking Insomnia, a lovely little bonus round in your winter survival game. And here's the unsettling twist. You're not alone. One man gets up and walks in circles around the longhouse, not fast, just pacing, like something's chasing him in his head. Another woman mutters softly to herself as she spins thread by firelight, her hands moving automatically while her gaze is somewhere far, far away. Even the animals seem off. The goats are restless. The dogs won't sleep through the night. You ask someone about it the next morning, and they just shrug and say, "Winter dreams." You push a little, they shrug again. Too much dark. It confuses the mind. Then they walk away like that's a perfectly acceptable explanation for the collective unraveling of sanity. Turns out, it kind of is. There's a growing theory among scholars that polar night living months of near total darkness had a real effect on sleep and mental health. But back then, no science, no circadian rhythm charts, just intuition and superstition. If people started acting strange, no one diagnosed them. They told stories, blamed the spirits, made jokes, slept when they could, dreamed when they couldn't. And when dreams got strange, they paid attention. The sagas are full of visions that arrive in the night. Wolves stalking through shadows, women with wings instead of arms, great trees growing upside down from the sky. They weren't dismissed as dreams. They were omens, messages from gods or ghosts. And winter, especially the deepest part of it, was the most fertile ground for those visions. Sleep less, dream more. Not in the inspiring Instagram way, in the terrifying, night sweat, wake up screaming kind of way. You've felt it already. Dreams where the longhouse is upside down, where the snow talks in a voice that sounds like your own, where someone keeps knocking on the door, but no one ever opens it. You try to shake them off, but they cling like smoke. Quirky fact for you. Berserkers, the infamous Viking warriors who fought in trance-like frenzies, were said to get their power from visions, sleep deprivation, or spirit possession. Some modern theories suggest they might have used altered states brought on by extreme fatigue, fasting, or certain herbs. One old poem even suggests that dreams of wolves and blood made a warrior stronger. So maybe your weird dreams are just prep work. You're halfway to berserker status. Tonight you can't sleep again, so you get up. You step quietly over snoring bodies and push open the longhouse door. The cold hits you like a slap, but it wakes you up fully. Outside, the world is quiet but not dead. The sky is black, dotted with stars so sharp, they look like they could slice you open if you stare too long. The snow reflects them, shimmering faintly like a mirror of the heavens. For a moment, it's beautiful. Then you realize what's missing. No moon, no wind, just silence and cold in you. You sit down in the snow, back against the wall of the house, and look up. Your breath curls into the sky, and your thoughts drift with it. You remember voices from your dream, the one where you were underwater, but the water was made of light. The one where your grandmother's voice came from the fire. The one where your own shadow asked if you wanted to leave. You don't even know what time it is. Eventually, the door creaks behind you. A woman steps out, older, wearing a cloak that looks like it was stitched from the night sky. She doesn't speak, just sits beside you, her boots crunching softly in the snow. After a while, she says, "They call this Wolf Hour, the time between dreaming and waking." You nod. It feels like a truth, even if it's nonsense. Then she says, "If the dreams get too loud, breathe into the wind. It'll carry them away." You do it. Deep breath in, frost on your lips, then out, long and slow, like exhaling ghosts. Maybe it works, maybe not. But you feel a little lighter, a little more. Grounded in your freezing, sore, half-delirious body. She stands and goes back inside. You follow a moment later. Inside, the longhouse is still, but someone has added a second log to the fire. Its light feels softer now, like it's watching over you instead of just burning to stay alive. You lie down, and for once, sleep comes quickly. And your dreams, they stay quiet, for now. The ground is too hard to dig. That's the first problem. The second is that someone has died. You learn about it the same way everyone else does, quietly. A whispered word passed through the longhouse. A slow silence spreading over breakfast. One less bowl passed around. No crying, no wailing, no dramatic declarations. Just a shared awareness, heavy and calm. as if everyone had already made peace with the possibility and had simply been waiting for it to arrive. He was old, one of the elders, skin like birch bark, voice like gravel soaked in mead. You never knew his name, not really, just a blur of consonants you never quite caught. But he had always been there, sitting near the fire, muttering about weather patterns and how wolves used to be more polite. And now he's not. You look toward his usual spot, empty, just his fur blanket folded in half, his boots placed beside it. His walking stick rests against the wall, like it's waiting for him to come back and grab it. But he won't. Death doesn't pause for winter, and winter doesn't make it easier. In some ways, it makes it worse. There's no earth to receive the body, no soft soil to dig into. Only frozen ground, harder than stone, locked in ice. Digging a grave in this season isn't just labor. It's punishment. So instead, they build a cairn. A few men haul stones from the riverbank, stacking them with slow precision in the frozen clearing behind the longhouse. You watch from a distance, feeling the chill press down heavier than usual. The body is wrapped in fur, carried on a wooden board. His face is covered. You don't see it. You don't want to. The burial is short, practical. A few words are spoken, low, rhythmic, more chant than speech. Someone lays a carved bone beside him. Another places a knife, not the good kind, not a raiding blade or a sword, just something simple for the journey, a token gesture. You had expected a dramatic send-off. Flaming ships, thunder, Valkyries. But this isn't a saga. This is survival. And even in death, people economized that historical fact. In deep winter, Viking burials often adapted. Traditional ship burials or mound. Graves required resources, time, manpower, materials that might not be available when the land was frozen solid. In places like Iceland, Greenland, or northern Norway, bodies might be stored in outbuildings, buried in shallow graves, or even laid beneath cairns until the spring thaw allowed for a more proper interment. You wonder about that. About the people who died and just waited, frozen in the dark, until the earth softened enough to take them in. How many longhouses kept their dead close for weeks, maybe months? Tucked away, wrapped in fur, given a corner like an honored but very silent guest. Someone once told you that Vikings believed the soul lingered near the body after death. Not always, but sometimes, especially if the death was violent or sudden or lonely. Which might explain the way no one walks too close to the cairn when it's done, or why someone mutters a protection charm into the fire that night without explanation. The air feels different now. Not colder, exactly, but quieter, like the world has acknowledged the loss and decided to leave space for it. Later that evening, you find yourself staring at the sky, thinking about what happens next, for him, for you, for everyone crammed into this frost-locked house. The Vikings didn't have a single idea of the afterlife. It wasn't just Valhalla or nothing. There was Helheim, the underworld for those who didn't die in battle. Cold, shadowy, not evil, just distant. There was Folkvanger, Freya's field where noble souls might go. And there were other places too, some beautiful, some strange, some terrifying. The soul's path wasn't straight. It was a journey through myth. And yet, the line between life and death didn't feel final in this world. People carved runes to keep memories alive. They passed down stories until they burned into your bones. The dead weren't gone. They were watching, waiting, maybe even judging your fire-making skills. You think of the old man's stories, the way he'd spit into the fire before he told one, the way he called the moon aunt, and said she listened better than most people. You wonder if he knew this was coming, if he'd dreamed it, if he'd made peace with it months ago, and was just waiting for the rest of you to catch up. Quirky fact of the day: some Viking families left food and drink out for their dead relatives during Yule, offerings to invite them home for one night, to listen to stories, to warm themselves by the fire. Not ghosts, exactly, just family, returned, if only briefly. Some even claimed to hear footsteps in the rafters, or see impressions in the snow outside that weren't there the day before. You glance at the rafters above the fire now. Empty, but not lonely. The longhouse is quiet tonight. No sparring, no arguing. Even the children have toned it down. Grief here isn't loud. It's worn like another layer in your posture, your breath, the way you stir the stew slower than usual. No one explains it. No one needs to. You wrap your blanket tighter and settle near the fire. The wind outside keens against the walls, but the hearth is warm and the coals glow steady. You stare at them until they blur, until they look like eyes, until they look like the same fire you've stared into for weeks, only now it sees you differently. Someone's missing, but you're still here. And in Viking winter, that's everything. There's a new cold now. Not colder in temperature. The snow is still the same endless blanket. The wind still sharp as flint, but colder in feeling. The kind that sinks past your skin, past your muscles, all the way into your bones. The fire doesn't touch it. The furs don't stop it. You move through the day like a shadow of yourself, and you're not the only one. Everyone in the longhouse has slowed down. Eyes look duller, movements stiffer. The bursts of energy you saw during Yule have faded. Even the children have stopped chasing chickens for sport. This is the cold that doesn't kill fast. It doesn't make a sound. It doesn't announce itself with fanfare or screaming. It just settles, a silent predator. You could call it hypothermia if you were in the future and had a thermometer. But here, it's just the moment your body stops trying. It starts with your fingers. They go numb so often you forget what they're supposed to feel like. Your toes, too. You begin to move like your joints belong to someone else. And the worst part? Sometimes it feels good. A strange, dreamy warmth, crawling up from your limbs to your chest, like your body's telling you it's okay to lie down. Just rest, just sleep, let go, that's the trap. One man did. He went to check the snares before dawn, wrapped in every scrap of wool and fur he owned. The snow was ankle deep, the wind light. And he never came back. By noon, someone found him under a pine tree, sitting with his back against the trunk like he'd just paused to catch his breath. His eyes were open, his mouth slightly parted, and his gloves were still on. That's how fast it happens. The body came back stiff. They didn't even try to warm it. What would be the point? Instead, they laid him beside the longhouse while someone cleared snow from a burial spot. This time, the ground was too hard even for stones, so they built a pyre, slowly, grimly, stacking what dry wood they had. The flames took a long time to catch, and everyone watched. No prayers. Just firelight and winter gloom, smoke rising into a sky that refused to change. There's a historical truth to it. The Vikings understood cold in a way most cultures didn't have to. They personified it, feared it, made it part of their mythos. Frost giants were some of the first beings in their cosmology, born from the ice at the edge of creation. Cold wasn't just weather. It was ancient. It was hostile. It had names, and when it took someone, you didn't fight it. You honored it. You acknowledged its power. Later that night, Someone tells a story by the fire about a man who tried to outrun the cold by running into it. He believed that if you ran hard enough, far enough, he could escape winter altogether. Instead, the snow turned to glass beneath him, and he shattered on the way down. A cautionary tale, sure, but also, strangely, a kind of joke. The kind you tell when there's nothing else to do but laugh at the thing that might kill you next. And here's a quirky little detail you wish wasn't real. Sometimes, in extreme cold, people undress. Their brains, starved of heat, start to believe they're burning. They strip off their furs, walk barefoot into snowbanks, lie down like they're sunbathing. The Longhouse has a word for it you can't quite pronounce. Something half curse, half whisper. But the meaning's clear. If someone goes outside smiling in their underwear, you don't follow them. Instead, you wait. You hope, or you mark the time. Until the snow stops falling and someone can go out and gather what's left. You find yourself checking your own fingers more now. Pinching your skin, tapping your feet, anything to remind your body that it's here. You drink more broth, even when it tastes like bark. You sit close to the hearth, ignoring the smoke that stings your eyes. You wrap and unwrap your scarf until the friction burns. You pretend to read the lines on your palm like they'll tell you how much longer you've got. And you keep watch, on yourself, on the others. Because here's the thing no one says out loud. Most people don't die of drama in winter. Not from wolves, not from sword fights or spirits. They die because they stop trying. One little surrender at a time. Skip a meal. Don't tie your boots. Forget to check the water bucket for ice. Step outside for a minute too long. Let the fire burn too low. Don't notice the man next to you has stopped shivering. That's all it takes. There's debate among scholars about how many people truly fell to the cold each year in Viking settlements. Records are scarce. The dead didn't leave reports, but bones. Tell stories, and some mass graves show signs of sudden seasonal mortality. Too many bodies buried too fast, all from the same village, the same month. Some think it was disease, others whisper famine. But those who have lived it, they know that cold alone can do the job. Tonight, you notice one of the children is too quiet. A little girl who usually sings songs about trolls is just sitting by the wall, staring at her hands. Her nose is red, her lips pale. You crouch beside her and pull her into your arms without a word. She doesn't resist. You tuck her under your blanket near the fire and start humming a tune you don't remember learning. She falls asleep with her head on your chest. You stay awake all night. In the morning, she's fine. The sun doesn't rise, but the Longhouse still stirs. Someone checks the fire. Someone stirs the pot. Life continues. The cold is still there outside, inside, waiting. But so are you. And you haven't stopped trying. You've been in this Longhouse long enough to know that privacy is a myth. Every breath, every twitch, every ill-timed stomach grumble is someone else's business. You sleep nose to nose with cousins you've never properly met, wake up tangled in goat blankets and stray feet, and bathe, if you can call it that, next to the person whose job it is to make cheese. And yet, somehow, despite the crushing closeness of it all, things still manage to happen quietly. Take, for example, the affair brewing in the back corner of the Longhouse. It starts with the way two people never quite make eye contact, then the way they do. The way their hands brush just a moment too long when passing a cup of ale. The way one of them lingers a little too long by the fire after everyone else has gone to sleep. It's subtle, but not that subtle. Nothing can stay hidden forever in a room full of 20 people pretending not to listen. And honestly, who can? Blame them? The cold brings people together in ways that go beyond shared warmth and chores. When you've spent a month wrapped in the same damp wool and listening to the wind scream through the cracks in the roof, you start craving contact that isn't survival-based. Not just heat, but touch, connection. Someone who looks at you like you're more than just a walking pile of frostbitten toes. It's one of the strangest things about Viking winter. Even in the midst of all this death, hunger, and frost, people still find room for love. Or at the very least, lust. Historically, the Vikings weren't shy about relationships, even in the coldest months. In fact, the long winters were often seen as prime time for matchmaking, both romantic and strategic. There was no planting to do, raiding season was on pause, so what better way to pass the time than by pairing off and keeping warm the old-fashioned way? Some marriages were arranged, of course. Dowries negotiated, alliances forged, livestock exchanged. But others sparked under furs, over shared chores, during long nights of whispered storytelling and casual foot-to-foot contact under the communal blanket. The darkness gave people cover, gave them courage. And when the entire world outside is frozen and merciless, the heat of another person's breath can feel like salvation. There's a saying tossed around here, half serious, half dare. If you make it through one winter together, you'll survive anything. You're starting to see the logic. If two people can huddle side by side for weeks, sharing food, chores, dreams, and foot fungus, and still like each other, that's stronger than most battle-forged bonds. One night, you catch the two back corner lovers sneaking out, bundled in cloaks, faces flushed with the kind of excitement that looks suspiciously like frostbite, but probably isn't. You pretend not to see. They return hours later covered in snow, wearing matching grins that no one mentions. The fire pops once, like it knows something you don't. Quirky fact: in some Viking traditions, couples weren't considered fully married until they shared a bed for 8 nights consecutively. If one partner left the bed for even one of those nights, the whole deal had to start over. Imagine trying to make that happen with 20 relatives snoring in the same room and a dog chewing on your boots. Now that's commitment. You overhear an older woman talking about binding nights, special days during Yule when couples could sneak off for a bit of privacy. She says it like she's remembering something spicy and ancient. There are smirks, a few rolled eyes, but no one judges, because everyone here knows that sharing warmth isn't just about fighting the cold. It's about feeling human again. There's a scholarly debate about just how open Viking society was about sexuality. Some sources suggest they were surprisingly progressive. Women had rights to divorce, own property, and even choose lovers in certain cases. Others argue the sagas exaggerated or romanticized these freedoms. But what's clear is that winter didn't put life on hold. It just restructured it. And here's your historical nugget. Viking love poetry was a thing, and it wasn't subtle. Men and women composed verses full of fire and ice, longing and lust, many of which survive in skaldic poetry. Some of it was elegant. Some of it was basically 9th century dirty talk. Either way, it proves that even in a world built on survival, there was room for softness. You find yourself watching people differently now, noticing how hands touch shoulders, how people laugh a little louder after brushing snow off each other, how one person always saves the warmest bowl of stew for another. There's a kind of economy to affection here, nothing wasted. Every look, every lean, every shared breath is purposeful. And maybe you're not immune. You feel the hunger too. Not just for food, but for closeness. For the press of another body against yours in a way that isn't necessity, but choice. It sneaks up on you, soft and slow, like warmth returning to frost-numbed fingers. You catch yourself laughing more. You sit closer by the fire. You hold someone's gaze just a moment longer than usual. You remind yourself that this is temporary, that spring will come, that the snow will melt, that everyone will scatter again. Across farms and fjords and fishing boats. But for now, here, wrapped in fur and firelight, you are just a person. Cold, tired, and still alive. And someone else sees you, not as a burden or a body, but as something worth reaching for. You fall asleep that night, wrapped in shared blankets, your legs tangled with someone else's, your breath sinking as your dreams fold into theirs. And for once, the longhouse doesn't feel crowded. It feels full. You wake to a sound you haven't heard in what feels like years. Dripping. Tiny, inconsistent, barely there, but unmistakable. Asterisk drip, dot dot. DRIP drip, dot asterisk. Not a leak in the roof, not the stew bubbling over the hearth. Real, actual, natural melting. You sit up so fast your spine protests, but you don't care. You throw off the furs and scramble to the door, pushing past a groggy warrior still tangled in his own beard. Outside, it's blinding. Not bright, exactly, there's no full sun, not yet, but the sky has shifted. The clouds are thinner, the light feels clearer. The snow still covers everything in thick, deep folds, but the edges of the drifts are softening. Ice clings to the eaves of the longhouse, but water trickles down their sides in lazy little streams. Even the trees look different, less like icy skeletons, more like actual plants again. Spring isn't here, not yet, but she's on her way, and the world knows it. Inside the longhouse, the mood has changed. It's subtle, just a hair lighter, a touch more laughter, a few more people humming as they stir pots or sharpen tools. You hear someone whistle. No one says why, but you all feel it. The end is coming. Not of winter entirely, but of the worst of it. You've made it through the long dark, or most of you have. One of the old women is still sick. She's been fading. For days, her breath ragged, her skin pale and waxy. Someone says she saw too many winters. Others say she lost someone last season and never really came back. But she lies there quietly, wrapped in the same fur she once wove, and waits. No one cries. There's no energy for it. Just quiet care wiping her lips, holding her hand, whispering sagas when she sleeps. Death, even now, doesn't stop the thaw. And here's your historical fact. In Old Norse calendars, the year was split into just 2 seasons, summer and winter. No spring, no fall. You were either freezing or farming, nothing in between. But they knew when the change was coming. They watched the melt patterns, the way birds returned, the way the snow loosened its grip. And when it did, everything shifted. Suddenly, the longhouse is bustling. The farmers are digging out tools. The warriors are re-oiling armor, someone's even fixing a fishing net. Everyone's planning, not aloud yet, but you can see it in their hands. They're thinking about what comes after. What they'll do once the roads unfreeze, once the fjords crack open, and the boats can slip back into the water. Like hibernating beasts waking up hungry, you get swept into it. 2. Chopping more wood than necessary, reorganizing supplies that haven't moved in months, even checking your boots for holes. It's all premature, Sure, but necessary. Hope needs a place to live, and right now, it's nesting in every corner of the longhouse. And then there's the food. What's left is a game of math and prayer. You take inventory, counting sacks of barley, dried fish, the last bits of smoked meat. It's thin. You'll make it, barely, but only if no one gets wasteful. That means more. Water in the stew, more foraging when the ground softens, fewer indulgent snacks. One of the goats is looking a little too plump, and the cook keeps eyeing it like he's already roasting it in his mind. But there's still a treat here and there. Someone unearths a jar of pickled something you don't dare identify. It smells like regret, but tastes like triumph. There's laughter. Even the kids are louder again, running around the longhouse without getting immediately shushed. A toddler topples into a snowdrift and screams with glee instead of terror. You help him up, brushing snow off his face, and he grins like he's just discovered a new planet. There's a quirky old tale told during this time of year about a giantess who ate winter. She swallowed it whole, ice and all, and then sat in the sun until it melted in her belly. Then she sneezed, and spring came out her nose. No one tells you that story directly, but you hear it in pieces, bits of the rhyme floating through the air as children chanted under their breath. You'd laugh if the image weren't so weirdly comforting. You glance around the longhouse and see people emerging from hibernation. Not literally, they've been walking and working this whole time, but emotionally. A young man starts carving something intricate into a beam above the hearth. A twisting tree, its roots reaching down, its branches climbing up. Another woman starts singing again, a low tune about a fisherman lost at sea who married his selkie. Even the goats seem less irritated with existence, but with thaw comes mess. The snow begins to collapse underfoot, ice turns to slush, turning every path into a trap of wet socks and twisted ankles. Water leaks in through the roof in a dozen places. Someone falls through the top layer of snow and lands knee-deep in mud. The cursing that follows is legendary. Scholars still debate whether Norse settlements truly welcomed the thaw or merely tolerated it. Spring brought flooding, rot, unstable weather. Houses that stood firm all winter sometimes collapsed under wet snow. Stored food spoiled. Animals sickened. But it also brought freedom, possibility. You could leave, hunt, breathe. You step outside again, this time without dread, and look toward the horizon. No green yet, no blossoms, but the ice on the fjord has cracks in it. Tiny spiderweb. Fractures that sparkle in the light. You know what that means. Soon someone will test it. Soon someone will sail again, and you ... you don't know. You're not a raider, not a farmer, not a skald. Just someone who arrived, endured, and now stands blinking in the watery light, wondering what to do with survival. Inside, someone calls your name. Dinner! You turn back, brushing snow off your sleeves, and step through the doorway into the longhouse that no longer smells like smoke and despair, but something better. Something closer to living again. The melt has begun, and so have you. The ice breaks. With a sound you feel in your chest. Not a crack, not a pop, something deeper. Like the earth itself is stretching after a long sleep. You pause mid-step, eyes scanning the frozen fjord in the distance. There it is again, a low groaning moan that rolls through the air, and then a chorus of sharp staccato snaps. The ice is splitting, not all at once, but in long, crooked veins that streak across the surface like lightning frozen in mid-flash. You've never seen anything move so slowly and still feel so dangerous. And yet, Everyone gathers outside, standing along the ridge that overlooks the water. No one says a word. The whole longhouse, side by side in cloaks and scarves, staring down at the fjord as it begins to fracture. Somewhere below the surface, water churns, dark and restless. A bird circles overhead your first in weeks and calls out with a single echoing cry. Even nature seems to be waking up, and that's when it hits you. You survived. Not just a night, not just a blizzard, the whole winter. Sure, you're still half frostbitten, sleep-deprived, mildly malnourished, and emotionally bruised. But you're alive. The longhouse still stands, most of its people are still breathing. And for the first time in what feels like lifetimes, the future isn't a vague idea shrouded in snowdrifts. It's real. Tangible, loud as cracking ice and bright as thin spring. Light spilling through gaps in the clouds. Inside, the rush to transition begins. Cloaks are aired out, boots are repaired again, the sled dogs are shaved. Someone tries to patch a fishing net that's more whole than thread. There's movement in every direction, a chaos that feels almost giddy. Plans are forming quickly, desperately. The way steam rushes off a boiling pot. Because now there's so much to do. First, the repairs. The roof's sagging in two places. One of the outer walls has a section bowed from snow weight. The barn door, cracked weeks ago, finally gives out and falls straight into a puddle with a sad little splat. Tools that have been sitting idle for months are now in constant motion, hammers tapping, ropes tightening, wooden slats being fitted. Like puzzle pieces you almost forgot how to solve. Then come the animals. They're as relieved as you are, if not more. The goats practically dance across the muddy yards, slipping and headbutting everything in reach. The chickens are confused, loud, and deeply suspicious of the sunlight. Even the dog who spent most of winter under a bench refusing to make eye contact with reality now trots around proudly with a bone the size of a toddler. And then there's the human toll. Now that the worst is past, people begin to look around and really see each other again. You notice the limp someone's been hiding, the hollowed cheeks on a man who barely ate through January, the lines on a woman's face that weren't there before the snow first fell. Survival costs something, and spring doesn't erase the tab. It just lets you look at the receipt. But there's joy too, actual joy. Someone pulls out a bone flute and starts playing a tune so cheerful, it feels like blasphemy. Two women dance, spinning in the mud, laughing so hard they fall over. Someone brings out a tiny stash of honeyed mead saved from last summer, and suddenly there's a party. Not a feast, not yet, but a celebration. You drink, you laugh, you clap along. Even the elders smile. And here's your historical fact for the day. Viking settlements often held blot, seasonal festivals that marked the turning of the year. Spring was sacred. Offerings were made to the gods to ensure a fertile planting season and safe sea journeys. Animals were sacrificed, songs were sung, mead was drunk in quantities that would make your modern liver file a complaint. You don't see any sacrifices today, unless you count the goat someone finally stopped eyeing and started roasting. But the spirit is there. Gratitude, relief, the feeling that you stared down the darkest nights of the year and made it to the other side. There's a quirky tradition too. In some regions, spring rituals involved symbolically sweeping out winter spirits. People beat the walls of the house with birch branches or shouted chants to drive away lingering cold. A woman here takes it seriously. She runs around the longhouse, smacking every wooden surface while chanting a rhyme about chasing frost trolls back into their holes. No one stops her. She's earned it. And here's the debate scholars still chew on. How much of this seasonal shift was practical, and how much was deeply spiritual? Some argue the Norse saw the end of winter as a divine reprieve, a reward for endurance, proof the gods hadn't abandoned them. Others believe the customs were just clever ways to reset the communal mind, to channel emotion and grief into ritual. But from where you're standing, watching people hug and dance and wipe mud from each other's cheeks, it's probably both. Later that night, after the mead's long gone and the fire's burned low, you step outside one more time. The air is different. Now less bite, more breath. The snow is soft under your boots, sinking with each step. The moon peeks through the thinning clouds, silver and patient. You look at the longhouse behind you. Its walls are smoke-darkened, its roof patched, its doorway crooked from months of frost. It's not pretty, it's not even fully functional, but it held. It sheltered you when the world froze over. And you, well, you're not the same person who walked in months ago. You've felt your blood slow in your veins. You've seen friends freeze, goats fight for bread, and children lulled to sleep with ghosts. Songs, you've sharpened blades, carved wood, cried quietly, and laughed when you shouldn't, and you made it. Tomorrow you have a plan. You'll help clean. You'll dig into mud and try to remember how things used to work. But tonight, just for now, you stand under the stars and let yourself feel something you haven't dared to name in weeks. Not just hope, pride. You didn't just witness how Vikings survived the coldest nights of the year. You lived it. The first green you see doesn't come from the ground. It comes from a scarf, an old, faded strip of woven wool someone pulls from. A chest at the back of the longhouse. It's bright in a way nothing has been for months, not dyed in winter's desperate earth tones, but in some long-forgotten shade of spring. Mossy, hopeful, alive. The woman who wears it doesn't say anything. She just drapes it over her shoulders and goes outside, her breath still misting in the air, her feet sinking into the slush like she doesn't care anymore. You follow her without meaning to. You just need to be where color is not outside, the world's. Still half frozen and soaked with meltwater, but the shape of the land is coming back. Humps and ridges you forgot about are starting to reappear. The black soil is softening at the edges of the longhouse. Tree trunks are dripping. Birds not many, but enough to make your heart stutter flit between branches, scouting, chirping cautiously like they're not quite sure this isn't a trap. You crouch near the edge of the longhouse and scrape the snow away with your hands. Cold mud meets your fingers. You smell it before you see it, that sharp, loamy scent of thawing earth. And there it is, one tiny ridiculous sprout pushing up. Through the muck. Barely a plant, more like an idea of a plant, but still a thing growing. You sit there for a long time just watching it, a small green rebellion against the months of white. Inside, everyone is shifting gears. The winter tools are being stashed away, sled runners taken off, snowshoes stacked in corners, the bone needles used to repair wool being wrapped and stored. And new tools take their place, scythes, seed bags, shovels with cracked handles. The longhouse turns into a hive of forward-thinking noise. No more talk of surviving. Now it's planting, sailing, rebuilding. You help dig trenches outside for water runoff, your hands blistering within the hour. You scrape ice from the garden bed beside the house, where someone plans to try growing onions again, despite last year's disappointment. The soil resists at first, but then reluctantly yields. Historical fact: Viking settlements, especially in places like Iceland or Greenland, relied heavily on these brief growing seasons. Every moment of thaw mattered. They planted barley and oats, grew leeks and cabbage, and kept herb gardens near their homes. Crops weren't just food. They were proof of planning, cooperation, and a kind of stubborn optimism. You didn't farm here unless you believed the earth would give back. But spring was risky. Too much sun too soon, and the melt would flood the valley. Too little, and the soil wouldn't loosen in time. You needed balance. You needed the weather to listen and the gods to notice. So people hedged their bets. Offerings begin again, not dramatic sacrifices, just quiet tokens. A slice of bread buried at the forest edge. A carved figure placed in a tree hollow. A whispered prayer spoken into the wind. You catch one man placing a feather into the garden. Soil, pressing it down with a reverent thumb before covering it in mud. You don't ask what it means. It probably means everything. That night, the longhouse is full of smoke again, but this time from cleaning, not cooking. They burn old hay, clear ashes from the hearth, toss out winter garbage that even the goats won't touch. One child runs out, gagging after finding something unholy in the back corner. No one's sure what it was. Probably something that used to be food. And then there's the light. Each day, it lingers a little longer. What was once a 2-hour blink of gray has become something almost resembling sunshine. The glow stretches across the floor at strange angles, illuminating parts of the house that haven't seen real brightness in months. Dust dances in the beams. You find yourself staring at it like it's sacred. There's a new ritual too, though no one calls it that. In the early evening, people just stand outside. They don't talk, they don't work. They just stand, facing the horizon, letting the light soak into their faces. You join them, breath fogging, shoulders aching, eyes half closed. The light feels like forgiveness. Quirky fact of the day: Norse mythology includes a concept called lifrasir, a kind of life thirst or burning desire to live. In some sagas, after Ragnarok, the end of the world, 2 humans survive by hiding in a forest, feeding on dew and clinging to hope. And from them, the world begins again. That's what spring feels like here. Not a continuation, a restart. Life returning after the end. There's still snow, sure. Still hunger. Still work ahead that'll break your back and blister your hands. But the wait is over. The dark has passed. The walls are quieter now, the spirits soothed by the season, return to their places in the trees and lakes and under the eaves. And you're lighter. Not just because the air is warmer, but because you made it through. You step outside one last time before bed. The sky is wide and blue-gray, streaked with the ghost of sunset. A bird sings. Not a sad bird, not one begging for warmth. A confident bird telling the world it's time to wake up. You can't see it, but you believe it's out there, puffed up on a branch, proud and smug. The little green sprout you found this morning is still there. It's grown half an inch. You laugh. The wind carries it away gently. The longhouse door closes. Behind you, the fire crackles, not because it has to, but because it's comforting. Someone hands you a bowl of stew that tastes like spring onions and leftover salt pork. It's not gourmet, but it's hot, and you eat it with a new kind of hunger. Not the hunger of survival, but the hunger of living. And for the first time in what feels like forever, you know tomorrow will be better than today. The house doesn't feel like a cage anymore. Now it feels like a memory. A thick, smoky, creaky memory made of wool and breath and frost and voices that still echo in the rafters when things go quiet. You've stepped outside more times in the past week than you did in all of January. The snow shrinks each day, and in its place mud. Honest, messy, life-giving mud. Your boots are soaked through, your fingers are raw, and you've never felt more alive. You think back to that first night, how loud the wind was, how small the fire seemed, how you thought, there's no way I survive this. And you almost didn't. There were moments, the cold seeping into your bones, the silence that felt like drowning, the grief that never came with answers. But here you are. You remember the songs sung in the dark, the heat of shared laughter, the sting of melted snow, slipping down your collar during chores you didn't ask for. And most of all, you remember the quiet acts of care. A blanket shared, a story told, a meal portioned just slightly in your favor. No epic battles, no gods descending from the clouds. Just people being kind in the dark. Now the birds are back. The rivers are running. The fjord, once a sheet of glass, moves again. And you move with it. So, as the season shifts and the world thaws open like a clenched fist, you take one last long look at the longhouse that taught you how to endure. You survived the coldest nights of the year. And somehow, quietly, you became part of the story.